You are standing on a chalk cliff, the wind whipping a fine, salty mist against your face. Below you, the sea churns a restless grey-green, a colour that seems to bleed into the sky at the horizon. This is the edge of the world. Or at least, the edge of your world. Prydein, the island of mists. The year is 100 by the continental calendar, a count of time that means little here. To the east, just beyond the haze, lies Gaul, a land of straight roads, stone cities, and legions, a land utterly transformed. But that transformation stopped here. At the water's edge, you look inland. There are no straight roads carving up the landscape. There are no marching columns of men in segmented armour. There are no stone villas with heated floors. Instead, you see a rolling tapestry of deep, ancient forests, tangled and dark, broken by patches of cleared land where circular houses cluster like mushrooms. You see the glint of rivers snaking through marshland and the great, hulking shapes of hills crowned with earth and timber. This is a land that breathes a different rhythm, one dictated by the seasons, the tides, and the intricate web of loyalties that binds one clan to another. The story of how this came to be is a story of what did not happen. 2 generations past, the great warlord Claudius of the Romans gathered his armies in Gaul. The invasion of Britain was meant to be his crowning glory, a final taming of the wild isles that even the mighty Julius Caesar had failed to fully subdue. The ships were built, the legions drilled, the omens read. But history does not always march to the sound of trumpets. A sudden and violent uprising on the Rhine frontier, a rebellion far more threatening to the stability of the empire, demanded the legion's immediate attention. The invasion was postponed, then postponed again. Eventually, the strategic calculation shifted. Britain, with its fierce tribes and its lack of obvious, easily exploitable riches beyond some tin, was deemed a costly distraction. The eagle had looked across the water and for the first time in centuries had decided the prize was not worth the price. The invasion was cancelled. Prydein was left to itself, and so it evolved. Without the shattering blow of Roman conquest, the native Brythonic cultures were not broken, not paved over, not remade in another's image. They were allowed to continue their own slow, complex dance of development. You see this political reality etched into the very landscape. You are in the lands of the Atrebates, but your allegiances are complex. Your chieftain pays tribute not to a Roman governor, but to the stronger king of the Catuvella Oni to the north. Yet, his wife is from the Durotriges to the west, a marriage meant to secure peace along a contested river valley. This is the reality of power in Prydein. In the vast, moorland-dominated north, the Brigantes hold sway, a loose but powerful alliance of clans who guard their territory fiercely against rivals. In the east, the fields of the Iceni are rich, their metalworkers famed for their golden torques, intricate spirals of immense value and spiritual significance. In the far southwest, in the land of Dumnonia, miners delve into the earth for the tin that has made this island a destination for traders since before memory. These are not unified kingdoms in the way a Roman would understand it. They are webs of obligation, kinship, and ancient rivalry. A powerful chieftain is not one who commands legions, but one who can summon a warband through promises of glory, of feasting, and of lavish gifts. His power lasts only as long as his charisma and his generosity. To understand this world, you must climb. You leave the coast and walk inland, following an ancient trackway worn deep into the earth by generations of footsteps, hooves, and wooden wheels. Your destination looms ahead, a great hill fort, its multiple rings of earthen ramparts and deep ditches rising from the landscape like a sleeping giant. This is the heart of the kingdom, the centre of power. As you pass through the imposing timber gateway, the air changes. Inside is not a military camp, but a bustling town. You see dozens of large, conical-roofed roundhouses, their wattle and daub walls warm with the smoke from central hearths. You smell livestock, wood smoke, and the scent of baking bread. You hear the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the chatter of women weaving brightly coloured cloth, the shouts of children playing a game with knucklebones. This is a society built not on stone and mortar, but on earth, timber. In the centre of the fort is the great hall of the chieftain, a roundhouse larger than any other, where he holds court, dispenses justice, and feasts his warriors. His wealth is not counted in coin but in cattle, in the contents of his vast granaries, and in the intricate bronze shields and cauldrons displayed for all to see. It is a system of personal loyalty, where a warrior pledges his sword to the chieftain who feeds him, who honours him, who leads him to victory. But the true power on this island, the force that transcends tribal boundaries and unites this fractured world, it is found in the shadows of the sacred groves, in the quiet wisdom of the Druids. Without the Roman attempt to exterminate them, the Druidic order has flourished. It is the intellectual and spiritual backbone of Prydein. The Druids are far more than priests. They are the judges who mediate disputes between kings, their verdicts backed by the threat of spiritual exile, a fate worse than death. They are the law-keepers, the living libraries who spend 20 years of their lives memorizing the genealogies of kings, the ancient laws, the epic poems, and the sacred stories of the people. They are the astronomers who chart the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, determining the auspicious times for planting, for harvest, for war, and for peace. They are the island's diplomats. A druid, marked by his white robes and his deep knowledge, can walk unmolested from the lands of the Iceni to the heart of Dumnonia, carrying messages, arranging treaties, and fostering the fragile sense of a shared Brythonic identity. They teach the concept of the soul's immortality, its transmigration from one form to another, a belief that steals the heart of the warrior and gives meaning to the life of the farmer. Their sacred sites are the still, dark groves of ancient oaks, places where the veil between worlds is thin. Here, they perform their rites, read the omens, and offer counsel that can make or break kingdoms. They are the glue. Without them, Prydein would be a chaos of endless, petty warfare. With them, it is a coherent, if decentralized, civilization. The economy flows along these lines of kinship and spiritual authority. A Dumnonian tin ingot might be traded for an Icenian torque, not through a formal market, but as a carefully negotiated gift between chieftains, a transaction overseen and blessed by a druid. Irish gold and slaves from the north are traded for fine continental wine and glassware, brought by Armorican merchants who brave the seas in their sturdy hide-covered boats. It is an economy of relationships, not of abstract currency. Warfare, too, is different. You have seen the warbands gather. Men with their hair limed into stiff spikes, their bodies painted with swirling blue designs, their long moustaches drooping. They do not fight in silent, disciplined ranks. They charge with a terrifying cacophony of shouts and the blare of the carnix, a great bronze war horn shaped like a boar's head. And at the forefront are the chariots, the vehicles of the nobles. A skilled warrior will drive his chariot at terrifying speed along the enemy line, hurling javelins before leaping down to engage in single combat, a display of individual prowess meant to inspire his followers and demoralize his foes. It is chaotic, terrifying, and deeply ritualized. It is not the relentless, grinding machinery of the Roman legion. As dusk falls on the hill fort, you watch the fires being lit in the hearths of the roundhouses. The wind carries the sound of a bard beginning a tale in the great hall, a story of ancient heroes and magical deeds, accompanied by the gentle notes of a harp. This island is isolated, but not ignorant. Its people know of the Roman world. They see its manufactured goods, hear tales of its immense cities, and understand its power. But they also see it as alien, a world of unnatural order, of straight lines and stone cages. Here, life is circular, like the houses, the hill forts, and the turning of the seasons. It is a world in balance, a culture that has been allowed to reach a vibrant, complex maturity on its own terms. It is strong, proud, and unique. But across the water, the continent is changing. New ideas, new beliefs, and new ambitions are stirring. The mist that shrouds Prydein keeps the Roman legions out, but it will not keep the future at bay forever. The question that hangs in the smoky air of the Great Hall is not whether change will come to this island, but what shape it will take when it finally washes ashore. 2 centuries have passed since Rome turned its back on Prydein. The great hill forts still command the horizons, the seasons still dictate the cycles of planting and feasting, and the Druids still interpret the will of the gods from the rustling of oak leaves. But you can feel a subtle change in the air, a new current in the tide of ideas. You are standing in a bustling coastal market in the land of the Dumnonii, a place where the tin-rich earth meets the sea. The air is thick with the smells of salt, tarred rope, smoked fish, and damp wool. Here, the island's pulse is strongest, its connection to the wider world most tangible. Gaulish merchants, their accents thick and their manners shaped by a world of stone cities, haggle over the price of tin ingots and fine, jet-black pottery. Their ships, larger and more robust than the local hide-covered curraghs, bring back goods that speak of another reality. Amphorae filled with dark, sweet wine, barrels of salt, and shimmering glassware of a quality no craftsman in Prydein can yet match. For generations, this trade has been the island's window onto the continent. But now, these ships carry more than just cargo. They carry whispers. You watch a merchant from Lugdunum, a man named Flavius, as he oversees the unloading of his wares. He is a good trader, respected for his fair dealings, but he is different. At the dawn ritual, where the local chieftain made an offering of mead to Manannan mac Lir, the god of the sea, Flavius stood apart. He did not mock, but he did not participate. He simply bowed his head in a moment of private silence. Later, you see one of his crew, a young man with fear still etched in the lines around his eyes, discreetly tracing a simple symbol in the sand with a stick, 2 intersecting lines, like a fish. When a warrior of the chieftain's guard approaches, he quickly scuffs it out. These are the first seeds of a new faith, arriving not with a legion's eagle or an emperor's decree, but in the quiet conversations of traders and the haunted stories of refugees. It is the 4th century, and the Roman Empire is a cauldron of spiritual turmoil. A religion born in a distant, dusty province of the East has spread like wildfire through its veins. At times, its followers are brutally persecuted, hunted, and driven from their homes. At other times, the imperial gaze is elsewhere, and the faith flourishes in the teeming cities. This ebb and flow of persecution is what drives the first Christians to Prydein's shores. They are not missionaries in the formal sense. They are weavers, potters, merchants, and stonemasons seeking a place where the emperor's agents will not follow. They speak of strange, radical things. They talk of a single, all-powerful God, unseen and unknowable, who created the entire universe. This idea is profoundly alien to the Brythonic mind. The world you know is alive with gods, spirits, and presences. Lug is in the brilliance of the summer sun. The Morrigan is in the frenzy of the crow on the battlefield. The spirits of your ancestors are in the standing stones that dot the landscape. The rivers have their goddesses, the mountains their sleeping giants. To claim there is only one God, and that he is not in the world but outside of it, sounds like madness. It feels like a hollowing out of reality, a draining of all colour and life from the world. Even more bizarre is their concept of time. The Druids teach that life is a great wheel. The seasons turn. The sun rises and sets, and the soul, upon death, is washed clean in the other world before being reborn into a new life. There is no beginning and no end, only the endless, sacred cycle. They say the world was created at a specific moment, and it is moving toward a final day of judgment. They speak of a single life, a single chance to win either eternal paradise or everlasting damnation. To a people who measure their history in the endless genealogies of kings and the turning of constellations, this linear narrative of sin and salvation is almost incomprehensible. The Druids are the first to recognize the threat, not a physical threat, but a spiritual one. You sit in on a council between a powerful chieftain of the Durotriges and an elder Druid. His face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes holding the deep calm of one who has watched 80 winters come and go. They are quiet people, the chieftain says, speaking of a small community of Gaulish refugees who have settled near the coast. They pay their tribute, they cause no trouble. The druid slowly shakes his head. A sickness of the soul can be quiet at first, my lord. They tell our people that the sacred groves are just trees. They say the spirits of the ancestors are merely silent dust. They teach that a man's loyalty should be to this invisible sky god, not to his kin, not to his chieftain, and not to the land that feeds him. He leans forward, his voice a low whisper. Their faith does not grow from the soil of this island. It is a rootless thing. And if our people embrace it, they too will become rootless. They will forget the songs. They will forget the names of the old gods. They will forget the sacred pact between us and the land. That is a death far deeper than any sword thrust. The druid's suspicion is echoed across Prydein. These followers of the Christos are often ostracized. They are seen as outsiders who refuse to take part in the communal festivals that bind a tribe together. Their refusal to acknowledge the local gods is seen not as a matter of private belief, but as a dangerous insult to the very powers that ensure a good harvest and victory in conflict. Why should the gods of the tribe protect a people who harbour those who deny them? Yet, the new faith grows. Not quickly, not like a forest fire, but slowly, like lichen on a stone. It finds purchase in the cracks of society. You see it in the eyes of a slave, a captive taken in a raid against a rival tribe. The druids teach him that his soul will be reborn, perhaps into a higher station if his fate allows. But the Christians tell him that in the eyes of their God, he is equal to the chieftain. They tell him that his suffering in this life will be rewarded in the next. For someone with nothing, this promise is a powerful solace. It also appeals to those who live between the tribes. A merchant who travels from the lands of the Iceni to Dumnonia finds it useful to belong to a brotherhood that transcends local allegiances. A Christian in one kingdom can find aid and shelter from a fellow believer in another, creating a network of trust that exists outside the rigid structures of kinship. In a hidden cove, away from the watchful eyes of the druids, you witness one of their secret gatherings. There are perhaps 20 people, a mix of Gaulish refugees and a few local converts. There is no temple, no altar, no sacrifice. A woman, a former weaver from Rome and Gaul, tells a story she learned from her mother. She tells it not in the formal Latin of the Roman Church, but in the flowing Brythonic tongue, her words weaving a new picture for a familiar landscape. The shepherd becomes a protector of the clan. The lost sheep is the lonely, the exiled, the forgotten. The message of a caring, personal God who values each individual soul begins to resonate. These first communities are intensely private. Their faith a mosaic of Christian belief and Celtic sensibility. They carve their fish symbols with the same swirling, intricate knotwork used to depict the sacred salmon of knowledge. They meet on hilltops that have been considered holy for centuries, seeing them not as the home of a pagan god, but as a place where the sky feels closer to the earth. It is a faith of adaptation, forced by necessity to blend in to survive. Back in the hill fort, the chieftain remains troubled by the druid's words. He rules a world built on shared traditions, on a common understanding of the sacred. This new faith, with its absolute claims and its rejection of all other gods, strikes at the very root of that consensus. It creates a private space, a loyalty beyond his reach. For now, they are a tiny minority, a strange curiosity on the fringes of his kingdom. Prydein, an island that held back the legions of Rome, now faces an invasion of a different kind. The whispers from Gaul have had a century and a half to steep, creating a landscape dotted with small, hardy Christian communities. They remain on the fringes, a faith of merchants, exiles, and the dispossessed, largely ignored by the Brythonic elite, as long as they pay their tribute and do not openly challenge the authority of the Druids. But now, a new wind is blowing, not from the east, from the shores of the Roman continent, but from the west. It comes from Eriu, the island the Romans called Hibernia, a land they never touched. a place as fiercely independent as Prydein itself. This wind carries with it a spark, a vibrant, ascetic, and intensely Celtic form of Christianity that will not remain on the fringes. It has come to set the island of mists ablaze. You are standing on the coast of Dumnonia, the southwestern tip of Prydein. A small boat, a curragh made of greased animal hides stretched over a wicker frame, lands on the shingle beach. They are gaunt, their faces weathered by sun and sea, their eyes burning with a fierce, otherworldly intensity. They wear simple, undyed woolen robes, and their heads are tonsured in a strange manner, the entire front of the scalp shaved from ear to ear, with the hair long in the back. This is not the Roman tonsure of the continent. This is the mark of the monks of Ireland. Their leader, a man named Fintan, steps onto the shore. He is not a conqueror with a sword, nor a merchant with goods to trade. He carries only a simple staff of ash wood and a satchel containing a hand-copied book of Psalms. He and his 12 companions have not come to seek refuge or fortune. They have come as willing exiles, engaged in a peregrinatio pro Christo, a wandering for Christ. They believe that to truly serve their God, they must abandon all earthly ties, their kin, their clan, their homeland, and set themselves adrift, trusting in divine providence to guide their vessel. Their journey is their prayer, their exile a form of martyrdom. This Irish Christianity is a product of its own unique crucible. A former Brythonic slave, Patrick, brought the faith to Ireland a generation ago. But in a land without cities, roads, or a central government, Roman-style bishoprics and dioceses could not take root. Instead, the faith was grafted onto the native Irish social structure, the clan, or tuath. The most powerful expression of this new faith became the monastery. These were not the isolated cloisters of the continent. An Irish monastery was a sprawling, chaotic, and vibrant spiritual fortress, often founded by a member of a royal family who became its first abbot. It was a centre of learning, agriculture, and craft. The abbot, not a distant bishop, was the figure of absolute authority, the chieftain of a spiritual clan. Fintan and his followers are products of this system. They are scholars who have memorized vast swathes of scripture, but they are also farmers who know how to work the land. They are ascetics who can fast for days on a windswept rock, but they are also deeply connected to the natural world they see as God's creation. Their faith is not one of abstract theology debated in stone basilicas. It is a faith of raw, poetic power, steeped in the same mythological substratum as the Druidism it seeks to replace. They do not begin by denouncing the old gods. That was the mistake of the earlier Gaulish Christians, a direct confrontation that only hardened hearts. Fintan's approach is different, a strategy of co-option and synthesis. He asks the local chieftain for a piece of unwanted land, a desolate, wind-blasted clifftop that is believed to be haunted by restless spirits. The chieftain, amused, grants the request. He and his druids watch, expecting these strange men to be driven mad or devoured by the ancient powers of the place. But they are not. Fintan and his monks build their simple wattle and daub huts, their circular stone oratory, and they begin to pray. They do not see the spirits as enemies to be vanquished by a foreign god, but as fallen angels, sorrowful beings who can be redeemed by the power of Christ's love. Fintan does not chop down the sacred hawthorn tree on the clifftop. He blesses it, hangs a simple wooden cross from its branches, and calls it a symbol of the tree of life. He finds a holy well, a place where for centuries the locals have left offerings for the water goddess Sulis. He does not forbid them from visiting it. Instead, he dedicates it to a new saint, Brigid, a figure in his own tradition who shares many of the same attributes as the old goddess, a patroness of healing, poetry, and smithcraft. This is the genius of the Irish spark. It doesn't seek to erase the sacred map of the land. It seeks to redraw it, to rename it. It presents a Christ who is not a Roman administrator, but a spiritual warrior, a hero king like the champions from the Celtic epics. The stories they tell resonate deeply with the Brythonic soul. The tale of Colmcille calming the monster in Loch Ness, the story of Brendan the Navigator sailing to a land of saints across the Western Ocean, these are not dry theological tracts. They are heroic sagas, filled with magic, mystery, and a profound sense of the divine woven into the fabric of the world. The local people watch, intrigued. The small, fearful Christian communities that had been hiding for generations see in these Irish monks a confidence and a power they have never known. They see men who can match the Druids in their ascetic discipline and surpass them in their scholarly learning. For the Irish monasteries have become obsessive centres for the preservation and copying of texts, both sacred and classical, in a way the purely oral tradition of the Druids cannot compete with. You witness a debate in the chieftain's hall. The head Druid, a man of immense learning, challenges Fintan on the nature of the cosmos. The Druid speaks of the three realms, the sky, the land, and the underworld, all interconnected. Fintan nods and speaks of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, three persons in one God. The Druid speaks of the soul's journey through countless rebirths. Fintan speaks of the single soul's journey toward God, but he uses the metaphor of a salmon fighting its way upstream to the pool where it was born, an image of heroic struggle and homecoming that every person in the hall understands. He is not replacing their worldview. He is offering a new and compelling interpretation of it. He is speaking their spiritual language. The power of this new movement is its structure. Fintan's small settlement on the clifftop is not just a hermitage. It is a seed. Once it is established, he sends out 2 of his monks to walk to the next kingdom, to find another chieftain, to ask for another piece of haunted, unwanted land. A network of monasteries begins to spread across the landscape of Prydein, a chain of light, as they call it. These monasteries become the new centres of the communities around them. They are more efficient farmers, introducing new techniques learned from old Roman texts they have preserved. They offer healing to the sick, using a combination of prayer and herbal lore that is often more effective than the Druids' rituals. Most importantly, they offer education. They will teach the son of a chieftain or the son of a blacksmith to read and write, skills that are beginning to be seen as a new and potent form of magic. The Druids, for the first time in 1,000 years, are on the defensive. Their power is based on a monopoly of knowledge, preserved through a lifetime of memorization. But now, these monks arrive with books, with libraries that can be copied and spread. The Druids' authority is rooted in tradition and the immutability of the sacred cycles. The monks speak of a dynamic, personal relationship with a single God, a message that offers hope and a sense of individual worth. The chieftains, who once relied solely on the Druids for spiritual sanction, now see these abbots as a new and powerful force, men who command the loyalty of the people and who seem to have a powerful connection to this new Christian God. The cultural fusion is profound. In the scriptorium of Fintan's monastery, you see a young Brythonic monk painstakingly illuminating a copy of the Gospels. But the designs he is painting in the margins are not the classical vines and grapes of Roman art. They are the swirling, endless knotwork of Celtic tradition, the zoomorphic patterns of intertwined beasts and birds that have adorned the shields and torques of his ancestors for centuries. The cross he paints is not a simple Roman cross. It is a Celtic cross, its intersections contained within a circle, a powerful symbol of the sun, of the turning of the seasons, the old world contained within the new. This is not the victory of one faith over another. It is a marriage. It is the birth of something new, a uniquely insular Christianity, passionate, mystical, and deeply rooted in the Celtic soul. The spark from Ireland has landed on the dry tinder of Prydein, and the old order is beginning to crumble, not by the sword, but by the power of a story retold in a familiar voice. The year is 500. A chill has settled over northern Europe, a subtle but persistent lengthening of the winters and shortening of the growing seasons. On the flat, flood-prone coasts of Jutland and northern Germania, the sea is rising, salting the fields and swallowing the villages. A great migration is underway, a restless movement of peoples driven by hunger and the search for new land. These are the Saxons, the Angles, the Jutes, fierce, pagan, seafaring peoples whose gods are gods of war and whose social structure is the warband, loyal to a generous chieftain. Their longships, magnificent vessels with high, arching prows, turn their dragonheads west, towards the rumoured riches and fertile green fields of the large island they call Bretland. In our history, they arrive to find a land in chaos, a former Roman province stripped of its legions, its infrastructure crumbling, its Romano-British leaders locked in petty squabbles and desperate enough to invite these very sea-wolves to be their guardians. They invited the fox into the henhouse, and the fox, predictably, devoured them. But that is not this history. You are standing on the earthen rampart of a great hill fort overlooking the eastern coast. In the lands of the Iceni, the kingdom is strong. Its fields are productive. And for the last 2 generations, it has been transformed by the fire of the new insular faith, with monasteries becoming centres of learning and the old warrior aristocracy embracing the story of Christ the hero king. The king of the Iceni, a man named Sinfor, does not see himself as a debased inheritor of a lost Roman glory. He sees himself as a Brythonic king, his lineage stretching back to the age of heroes, his authority sanctioned by the powerful abbot of the local monastery, a man who is also his cousin. He does not need to hire foreign mercenaries. He commands a Tulu, a war band of hundreds of loyal, well-armed warriors who are sworn to him by oaths of blood and faith. The warning comes from fishermen, their faces pale with terror. They speak of warriors with horned helmets and giant axes, men who fight with the fury of wolves. Sinfor is not alarmed. He is a warrior king, and this is the moment for which he was born. He sends out the call. From the scattered farmsteads and villages, the warriors gather. They are not a disciplined legion, but they are far from a disorganized rabble. They are horsemen, primarily. Skilled riders, with long spears and heavy, leaf-shaped swords. Their strategy is one of swift, shocking charges, of mobility and heroic combat. Sinfor leads his warband south, toward the coast. What he finds is not a simple raid, but an occupation, an entire tribe. Thousands of men, women, and children have beached their ships and are already building a fortified camp of timber and earth. Their leader, a Saxon chieftain named Aesk, is a giant of a man. The two forces meet on a wide, flat plain between the Saxon beachhead and the rolling hills of the Icenian heartland. The difference in their ways of war is immediately apparent. Sinfor's warriors are a swirling, dynamic force of cavalry. Their brightly painted shields and fluttering banners a riot of colour. They believe in the power of the individual charge, the heroic duel. The Saxons are a grim, grey wall of iron and wood. They form the Siled Well, the shield wall, an interlocking barrier of shields from which a hedge of spears protrudes. They are a solid, unmoving block of infantry. Sinfor's horsemen charge. They thunder across the field, shouting the name of Christ and their king, but they cannot break the shield wall. Their spears shatter on the Saxon shields, and their horses shy away from the bristling spear points. The Saxons do not pursue. They are a patient, grinding force. They advance slowly, methodically, the shield wall, a meat grinder that pushes the less disciplined Brythonic foot soldiers back. Sinfor and his noble cavalry charge again and again, harassing the flanks, picking off stragglers, but the wall holds. Sinfor loses many fine warriors. Aesk loses many too, but he holds his ground. As dusk falls, the Brythons retreat to the safety of their hills. They have not been defeated, but they have been contained. They have learned that their heroic style of warfare is ill-suited to breaking this new, stubborn foe. This pattern is repeated all along the eastern coast for the next 50 years. The Germanic newcomers arrive. They are met not by a vacuum, but by strong, organised Brythonic kingdoms like the Catuvelauni and the Trinovantes. It is a long, grinding, and bloody war of attrition that creates a new and permanent reality on the map of Prydein. The Saxons and Angles, with their mastery of infantry tactics, prove impossible to dislodge from the coasts and the flat, marshy fenlands of the east. But they lack the cavalry and the logistical support to push deep inland and take the great hill forts of the Brythonic kings. A frontier is born. It is a violent, unstable, and deeply mistrustful borderland, stretching from the Wash down to the Thames estuary. To the west lies Brythonic, Prydein, Celtic, and Christian. To the east, in a coastal strip of land perhaps 50 miles deep, a new world takes root. It is a place the Brythons call Yoiga, the Lost Lands, and the newcomers are beginning to call East Angleland, or the land of the South Saxons. Life on this frontier is hard. It is a land of raid and counter-raid, of burned villages and stolen cattle. But it is also a place of unavoidable interaction. A Saxon settlement needs iron for its tools and weapons, something the Brythonic smiths to the west can provide. A Brythonic chieftain might, despite the protestations of the monks, hire a band of Saxon warriors for a private war against a rival chieftain, paying them in the cattle they covet. A pidgin language emerges, a rough blend of Brythonic and Germanic words, just enough to trade, to bargain, to threaten. The cultural and religious chasm is immense. You travel with an Irish monk from the monastery at Lindisfarne as he attempts to bring the word of God to the Saxons. He is a brave man, his faith absolute. He stands before a Saxon village, a place of long, timber halls and foul-smelling pagan altars where animals are sacrificed to their grim gods. He speaks to them of Christ's love, of forgiveness and salvation. They listen, leaning on their axes, and then they laugh. Their gods are Woden, the All-Father who hungers for wisdom and sacrifice, and Thunor, the Thunderer who smashes his foes with a hammer. They see the monk's story of a god who allowed himself to be captured and executed as a tale of weakness and shame. They do not want a god of forgiveness. They want gods who will give them victory in the shield wall and grant them a place in the feasting halls of Valhalla after a glorious death. The monk is lucky to escape with his life, his message utterly rejected. This rejection solidifies the Brythonic identity. The struggle against the pagan Saxons becomes a holy war, a defining feature of their culture. The great hero of this age is not a king who conquers his Brythonic rivals, but one who wins a great victory against the Saxons on the frontier. Bards in the halls of the Western kings sing new epics, not of ancient, mythical heroes, but of the champions of the Saxon wars. The Church of the Isles, this unique Celtic Christianity, becomes even more militant, more intertwined with the Brythonic warrior ethos. The cross and the sword become inseparable. The Saxon tide, therefore, was not stopped, but it was diverted. It did not wash over the island and drown its native culture and language. It was channeled into a specific area, where it pooled and solidified. Prydein is no longer a purely Celtic island. It now has a permanent, alien, and hostile culture embedded in its eastern flank. This constant pressure forces the Brythonic kingdoms to adapt. They must maintain larger, more permanent warbands. They must build new fortifications along the frontier, and, most importantly, they must begin to think of cooperating in ways they never have before. The Saxon presence is a constant, nagging threat that will, in time, force the disparate Brythonic kingdoms to seek a unity they have always resisted. The island's long, slow crucible has just had a new, volatile element thrown into the mix. The year is 664. For over a century, the island of mists has been a land of two frontiers. In the east, a bloody, physical frontier of shield and spear holds back the pagan peoples of Loegra, but in the minds of the kings and abbots of Prydein, a second, more insidious frontier has been forming. This one is invisible, a line drawn not on a map, but in the soul. It is the frontier between their own vibrant, wild, and deeply rooted insular faith and the powerful, orderly, and increasingly assertive Church of Rome that dominates the continent. The pressure is building. The Frankish kings across the water have embraced the Roman rite, and their bishops now speak with the authority of St. Peter himself. Roman missionaries, ignoring the pleas of the Brythonic Church, have begun to land in the pagan lands of the East, attempting to convert the Saxons and create a Roman Christian beachhead on the island. The time for ambiguity is over. Prydein must formally define what it believes, or risk having its soul conquered by the very institution its ancestors never bent the knee to. You are travelling to Bangor Far, the Great Bangor, a monastery nestled in a valley in the heart of Gwynedd, in the west of Prydein. This is no simple collection of huts on a clifftop. It is a city of God, one of the greatest centres of learning in all of Europe. Thousands of monks live here. You see sprawling stone chapels, a vast library filled with priceless manuscripts from across the known world, workshops for metalworkers and scribes, and vast, well-tended fields. It is a beacon of the Insular Church, and it is here that the great Synod of the Isles has been called. The roads are crowded. You see delegations from every corner of the Celtic Christian world. There are the powerful abbots of Prydein, their entourages of learned monks and warrior patrons reflecting their immense temporal power. There are fiery, ascetic monks from the great monasteries of Ireland, Clonmacnoise and Iona men, who see themselves as the guardians of the true faith brought by Patrick and Colmcille. There are even representatives from the Brythonic kingdoms of Armorica in northwestern Gaul, a people who share the same language and faith, and who feel the pressure of the Frankish Roman Church most acutely. Convening this great council is Maurienne, the High King of the Brythons, a title more aspirational than absolute, but a man whose military victories against the Saxons have given him unprecedented authority. Maurienne is a man of deep piety, but also a pragmatist. He sees the fracturing of his people into factions, those who believe their unique traditions are their strength, and a growing minority who believe that aligning with Rome is the only way to secure their future in a changing Europe. He has called this synod not to surrender, but to forge a unified sword of faith that all his people can wield. Inside the great hall of the monastery, the air is thick with tension. On one side sits the traditionalist faction, led by the venerable Abbot Caddoc of Longphort. He is an old man, said to be the last living person to have been taught by a monk who knew St. Fintan himself. His face is a testament to the ascetic tradition, but his eyes are sharp and clear. He represents the soul of the movement that converted Prydein, the faith of the land, of heroic saints, of a God found in the crashing of the waves and the solitude of the mountain peak. Opposing him is Defrig, the Bishop of Gwent. Defrig is younger, a brilliant scholar who has spent years in the Frankish courts. He has seen the magnificent stone cathedrals, the vast, organised dioceses, the sheer power and wealth that comes from being part of the universal Roman communion. He does not see the Insular Church as heretical, but as provincial and dangerously isolated. He loves Prydein, and he believes that its survival depends on joining the mainstream of Christendom. The debate begins with King Maurienne presiding. The initial arguments are over the familiar symbols of the divide. Defrig speaks first, his Brythonic precise and logical. He argues for adopting the Roman calculation for the date of Easter. How can we claim to be part of the one body of Christ if we celebrate his resurrection on a different day from our brothers in Rome, in Antioch, in Jerusalem? It is a matter of unity, of order. We follow a calculation devised by our own holy men, yes, but the wider church has adopted a more accurate system. To cling to our old way is not piety, it is pride. Abbot Caddoc rises to respond, his voice quiet but resonant. Our way of counting the seasons was given to us by God through the wisdom of our saints. It is tied to the cycles of this land, this island. The faith of Rome is a fine thing for the Romans, for the people of the sun-drenched south. But we are a people of the mists and the tides. Our faith was forged here, and it wears a face that our people understand. To change the date of our greatest feast is to admit that our own saints were wrong, that our connection to God is secondary to a bishop in a distant city who has never set foot on our shores. The arguments continue, covering the tonsure, the insular Simon Magus shave versus the Roman crown of St. Peter. Cadoc counters that their tonsure was worn by the great saints who cast the darkness of paganism from this island, and to abandon it would be to dishonour their memory. But these are merely the skirmishes before the main battle. The true conflict emerges when the debate turns to the very nature of faith and authority. Defrig makes a powerful case for the Roman structure of bishops and dioceses, each bishop a successor to the apostles, all under the final authority of the successor of St. Peter in Rome. It is a chain of command that stretches back to Christ himself, he proclaims. Our system of powerful, independent abbots, each ruling his monastery like a chieftain, is a reflection of our worldly clan system. It is a recipe for chaos and division, not the unity the Church requires. It is then that Abbot Cadoc delivers the speech that will define the future of the island. He stands, his simple ash staff in his hand, and he speaks not of Rome, but of Prydein. The Lord Dyfrig speaks of a chain of command. We speak of a family of faith. He speaks of an authority derived from a distant city. We speak of an authority that flows from the sacred soil of this very island. Before the first Roman ever dreamed of this place, our ancestors knew that God was here. They saw him in the great oak. They heard him in the waterfall. They felt him in the standing stones. They did not know his true name, but they knew his power. His voice rises, filled with passion. Our holy fathers, Fintan and Colmcille, and 1,000 others, did not come to destroy that sacred world. They came to illuminate it. They taught us the name of the one who made the oak and the waterfall. They showed us that the hero quest of our old epics was a shadow of the soul's quest for Christ. We did not abandon our traditions. We baptized them. We took our oral histories, the genealogies of our kings, the great poems of our bards, and we understood that they too were part of God's plan for our people. He points a trembling finger at Dyfrig. You ask us to abandon this. You ask us to believe that God speaks only in Latin, that his grace is only dispensed through a Roman hierarchy. You ask us to believe that our sacred wells are just water, that our holy mountains are just rock. You ask us to uproot our faith from the land that has nourished it and make it a pale imitation of a foreign flower. I say no. I say that God spoke to the Hebrews in their language, and he speaks to us in ours. Our faith is a testament to that truth. The hall is silent. The power of Cadoc's words hanging in the air. He has perfectly articulated what everyone feels, that their Christianity is inextricably woven into their identity as a people. To accept Rome would not just be a change in religious practice, it would be a cultural surrender. King Maurienne rises. He looks from Dyfrig's earnest, pleading face to Cadoc's fierce, unyielding gaze. He sees his warriors, his chieftains, his people, and he knows which voice speaks their heart. The Abbot Cadoc speaks the truth of our history, he declares, his voice ringing with authority. We are Brythonic. We are of this island, and our church will be the church of this island. The Synod of the Isles does not end in a schism, but in a declaration of independence and a monumental act of creation. The assembled abbots and bishops, with the king's blessing, formally affirm their unique traditions. They will keep their own date for Easter, their own tonsure, their own monastic structure, but they will do more. They commission the creation of the Leb Ha Mor Prydein, the Great Book of Prydein. This will be a massive, illuminated manuscript, a grand synthesis of their entire culture. It will contain the Gospels, the Psalms, and the lives of the Insular saints. But it will also contain the great Brythonic epics, their genealogies traced back to mythical heroes, and the ancient laws of their people, all framed within a Christian context. It is to be their Bible, their constitution, and their national epic, all in one. They are a third trunk of Christendom, as ancient and as valid as Rome or Constantinople. The crucible has fired the clay. The Insular Church now has a formal identity, a unified purpose, and a sacred text to guide it. The year is 800. The Leb Ha Mor Prydein, the great book commissioned at the Synod of the Isles, has been copied and distributed to the major monasteries. It has become the heart of the nation's identity. a testament in vellum and gold leaf to the sacred fusion of Celtic soul and Christian faith. The Brythonic kingdoms, united in spirit by their independent church and in purpose by the long, grinding war against the Saxons of Logra, have entered a golden age of scholarly light and artistic brilliance. But the sea, the ancient barrier that kept the Romans at bay, is about to bring a new darkness to their shores. You are on the sacred isle of Yni's Moan, the ancient heartland of the Druids, and now home to one of the most revered monasteries in Prydein. The air is still, the morning mist clinging to the green fields. Then you hear it, not the gentle tolling of the monastery bell calling the monks to prayer, but a rhythmic, percussive sound from the sea, a pounding, like a great drum. Through the thinning mist, you see them. At first, they are just silhouettes, low and sleek against the grey water. Then, the sun catches them, and the nightmare takes shape. They are longships, a dozen of them. Their high, curved prows carved into the shapes of leering dragons and sea serpents. Great, square sails, dyed with red and white stripes, catch the wind, driving the ships forward with terrifying speed. These are not the clumsy trading cogs from Gaul or the familiar hide currachs from Ireland. These ships are predators. They are the pinnacle of maritime technology, a perfect fusion of form and function. They sit high in the waves but have a draft so shallow they can navigate a river no deeper than a man's waist. The rhythmic sound you heard is the beat of their oars, a single, unified pulse of raw power. Panic erupts. The monks rush to secure the monastery's treasures, the golden chalices, the silver reliquaries, and their priceless, jewel-encrusted copy of the Great Book. The local chieftain, whose fortress guards the strait, sounds the war horn. They simply run themselves onto the beach, and before the local warband can even muster, a horde of warriors leaps over the sides. They are a terrifying sight. Large, wild-looking men, bearded and long-haired, wearing conical iron helmets and coats of mail. They carry large, round shields painted with stark, terrifying symbols. They wield no spears for elegant charges, but massive, two-handed axes capable of splitting a shield or a man in a single blow. And they fight not with the heroic clamour of the Brythons, but with a berserk, terrifying fury, a joyful violence dedicated to their gods of war. The Vikings. They storm the monastery. They are not interested in conversion or conquest of the land. They are here for one thing: portable wealth. They tear the golden covers from the holy books, hack the silver crucifixes from the walls, and seize the sacred vessels. They do not see a house of God. They see a treasure hoard. The monks who resist are cut down without a thought. The others are bound with ropes, destined to be sold as slaves in the markets of Dublin or the far-off lands of the Rus. Within hours, the monastery is a smoking ruin, its treasures gone, its library a pile of burning vellum. The Vikings are back on their ships and disappearing into the mist before the High King's army is even aware of the attack. This is the new reality. For the next generation, Prydein is terrorized. The Vikings are a foe unlike the Saxons. The Saxons were a land-based threat, an advancing frontier that could be met with shield and horse. The Vikings are a sea-based threat, a ghost that strikes without warning and vanishes. They hit the rich coastal monasteries of the west and south, the very places that were safest from the Saxons. The Brythonic kings march their armies to the coast, but the raiders are already gone, striking another undefended monastery 100 miles away. The Brythonic reliance on heavy cavalry is useless against an enemy who refuses to give battle on an open field. The High King of Prydein, a descendant of Morien named Rodri, is a great warrior, but he is a land warrior. He builds a chain of watchtowers along the coast, but they only serve to watch the flames of the next raid. The Brythonic kingdoms are strong, but their strength is terrestrial. They have mastered the land, but they have forgotten the sea. The crisis forces a terrible reckoning. In the kingdom of Diverted, in the southwest, a young lord named Hywel watches his lands burn for the third time. He has lost 2 brothers fighting the raiders. He has seen the treasures of his family chapel melted down into pagan arm rings. He petitions the High King for a fleet, for ships to fight the Norse on their own terms. But the inland kings, their own land safe, are reluctant to invest in the costly, unfamiliar art of naval warfare. Driven by desperation, Hywel makes a decision that will brand him a traitor in some halls and a visionary in others. After a raid, a Viking longship is damaged in a storm and forced ashore. Hywel's warband captures the ship and its crew. Instead of executing the captured Norsemen, Hywel offers them a bargain. He will spare their lives, give them land and gold. If they teach his people their secrets, he wants to know how to build, sail, and fight in a longship. The captured chieftain, a grizzled raider named Ivar, scoffs at first. In a hidden cove, the first Prydein-built longships are laid down. Their elegant lines, a direct copy of Ivar's captured vessel. Brythonic carpenters, famed for their work in wood, learn the art of clinker building, of riveting overlapping planks to create a hull of immense strength and flexibility. Hywel's own warriors, horsemen by tradition, learn the grueling work of the oar and the brutal, close-quarters chaos of a sea battle. Within a decade, Hywel's fleet is a reality. His new fleet, crewed by Brythons but commanded with Norse tactics, ambushes a raiding party in the Irish Sea. The battle is a brutal, bloody affair of arrows, axes, and grappling hooks. This victory sends shockwaves through Prydein. Other coastal lords, tired of living in fear, follow Hywel's lead. A new power structure begins to emerge. While the High King and the traditional inland kingdoms remain powerful on land, a new string of coastal kingdoms rises. Their power based not on hill forts and cavalry, but on their fleets of longships and their fortified coastal bases. The Vikings had called their own ship fortresses Longforts, and so these new hybrid entities become known as the Longphort kingdoms. A cultural fusion, born of war and necessity, begins. Hywel and his followers see the pragmatism in the Norse way. They intermarry with the Norse they capture or ally with, sealing pacts of blood. A new aristocracy emerges. Men with Brythonic names who worship Christ, but who fight with a Viking's ferocity and bear Norse weapons. Their art reflects this fusion. Celtic knotwork begins to intertwine with the gripping beast style of the Vikings. Their language becomes peppered with Norse words for ships, for weapons, for the sea. These Longphort kingdoms become the new masters of the western seas. They trade with the new Viking city of Dublin, they raid the coasts of Francia, and they provide mercenary fleets to the High King to fight other Vikings for a steep price. They are a buffer, a hard shield that protects the Brythonic heartland. But they are also a cuckoo in the nest. Their loyalty is to their ships and their wealth, not necessarily to the High King or the abbots of the Insular Church. They are a new, unpredictable, and fiercely independent power. The island is now fractured into 3 distinct cultural and military zones. In the deep heartland are the old Brythonic kingdoms, the guardians of the insular faith and the Celtic tradition. On the eastern frontier, the pagan Saxon kingdoms of Yolagra remain a constant, simmering threat. And now, all along the western and northern coasts, from Diverted to the Northern Isles, the Longphort kingdoms have risen a new, dynamic, seagoing culture of Norse-Celtic warriors who have turned the Vikings' greatest weapon against them. The year is 950. 150 years have passed since the first longships of the Llyclynwyr brought fire and terror to the coasts of Prydein. The world they created, a world of violent adaptation and cultural fusion, is now the established order. It is a complex, 3-sided prism, its identity forged in a crucible of continuous, low-level warfare and wary coexistence. You stand on the high earthen walls of Caerverdin, a fortress town in the Brythonic kingdom of Diverted. From this vantage point, you can almost feel the 3 souls of the island. To the east, beyond the rolling hills and deep forests of the heartland, lies the Saxon frontier of Yoga, a place of sullen, pagan kingdoms that the Church still sees as a spiritual blight. To the west, the sea glitters, a highway for the ships of the Longphort lords, the Norse-Celtic sea kings who rule the coasts and islands with a fierce independence. And here, beneath your feet, is the old world. The Brythonic heartland, the kingdom of the High King, the keeper of the insular faith and the traditions of the Leib-ha Mor Prydein. For 5 generations, a fragile, violent equilibrium has held. But now, you can feel the ground beginning to shake. The pressures, both internal and external, are becoming too great to bear. The internal pressure has a name: Magnus ap Hywel, Lord of the Isles, the most powerful of the Longphort kings. You travel to his court, not in a traditional hill fort, but in a fortified port town on the Isle of Mon. His hall is not the great round house of a Brythonic chieftain. It is a cavernous timber longhouse in the Norse style, the roof held up by 2 rows of massive, carved pillars. But the carvings are a dizzying fusion. Viking-gripping beasts writhe alongside Celtic knotwork. A scene of Ragnarok faces a panel depicting David and Goliath. Magnus himself is the embodiment of this hybrid world. He is a giant of a man with the fiery red hair of his Celtic mother and the pale, ice-blue eyes of his Norse father. He speaks Brythonic at his high table, but barks orders to his ship captains in a Creole of Norse and Celtic. He is a Christian, but his faith is that of a warrior who sees Christ as the mightiest of chieftains, a lord of victory. His power is immense. While the High King in the Heartland commands the loyalty of land-bound warriors, Magnus commands the sea. His fleet of 50 longships is the single greatest military force in the Isles. He has grown fabulously wealthy, not just from raiding, but from controlling the trade routes that connect Ireland, Prydein, and the continent. And he is growing tired of paying even nominal tribute to a High King he has never met, a man he derides in his cups as the King of Sheep and Hills. He sees the High King's authority not as a sacred trust, but as an outdated tradition that limits his own ambition. The external pressure comes from across the narrow sea, from the land of the Franks. The great Carolingian Empire has fractured, but in its place, new, more tightly organized powers are rising. Chief among them is the Duchy of Normandy. You have seen their envoys at Magnus's court. They are a strange and unsettling people. They are descendants of Vikings, like Magnus's own ancestors, but they have been utterly transformed by the continent. They speak a dialect of French. They are clean-shaven. They fight not on foot with axes, but as the most devastating heavy cavalry in Europe. They see the Insular Church of Prydein not as a sister faith, but as a bizarre, semi-pagan heresy. These Normans look at the fractured state of Prydein and they see an opportunity. They do not yet have the strength for a full-scale invasion, but their Duke, William Longsword, is a cunning strategist. He seeks an ally, a foothold, and he finds one in Magnus ap Hywel. The news of their pact comes to the court of the High King, Owain ap Rodri, like a thunderclap. Owain is an old man now, his reign long and his victories against the Saxons many. He is revered as the guardian of the old ways. But he is a man of the land, and he is facing a crisis he cannot solve with a cavalry charge. The message, brought by a terrified monk, is that Magnus has granted the Normans a trading base on the south coast, in exchange for a regiment of their knights, and a promise of support for his own claim to the High Kingship. It is a triple threat. Militarily, it introduces the terrifying power of the Norman heavy cavalry to the island, an enemy the Brythonic warriors have no experience fighting. Religiously, it establishes a Roman Catholic beachhead, a direct challenge to the authority of the Insular Church. Politically, it is an act of supreme treason, an invitation to a foreign power to meddle in the succession of the High King. It is the single greatest threat to the independence of Prydein since the Saxons first landed. Owain knows the old systems are not enough. The High Kingship is a position of honour, of being the first among equals. The High King can call upon the other kings for aid, but he cannot command them. He cannot levy a universal tax to build a fleet. He cannot force the King of Gwynedd to march his men to save the kingdom of Diverted. Facing the unified ambition of Magnus and the disciplined power of the Normans, this loose confederation will shatter. He sends out the call for a great council, not of abbots this time, but of the kings and great lords of the Brythonic heartland. They meet at the ancient, windswept fortress of Deganwy, the traditional seat of the kings of Gwynedd. The mood is grim. The kings are proud men, jealous of their own power, and ancient rivalries run deep. Owain ap Rodri rises to speak, his voice frail with age but firm with resolve. "My brothers," he begins, his gaze sweeping over the assembled lords. "For 200 years we have held the line. We held it against the pagan Saxons in the east. We held it against the pagan Norse in the west. We did this because we were united in our faith and in our blood. But now, one of our own has opened the gate to a new foe. The Longphort lord on Mon has invited the Norman fox into our henhouse. A fox who wears the cross, but a Roman cross. A fox who brings warriors that fight like a moving wall of iron." He lets the words sink in. "Our way of war, our way of ruling, is no longer enough. While we bicker over cattle raids and land boundaries, Magnus builds a sea empire and the Norman Duke builds a kingdom. I can ask you to join me in battle, and you may come, but I cannot command you. I cannot build the ships we need to fight Magnus on the sea. I cannot forge the spears we need to face the Norman charge. Our strength is divided, and a house divided against itself cannot stand." He pauses, then makes his revolutionary proposal. "The time of the High King, the first among equals, is over. We face a new world, and we need a new kind of leader. I say we must reach back into our own history, into the pages of the great book, to the time of the greatest peril. We must elect a Pendragon." A murmur runs through the hall. The title is an ancient, almost mythical one, drawn from the heroic poems of the Saxon Wars. It means head dragon or chief warrior. It is not a hereditary title. It is a military office, a supreme commander chosen by the Council of Kings to hold absolute military authority over all the kingdoms of Prydein for the duration of the crisis. The Pendragon would have the power to levy troops, to command the armies of every king as a single force, to impose taxes to fund the war effort. It would mean the kings surrendering a measure of sovereignty that they have held for 1,000 years. The king of Powys, a young, hot-headed man, leaps to his feet. "Surrender my warriors to another's command? Never! The men of Powys follow me and me alone. But Owain is prepared, and they will die with you, alone, when the Norman knights ride through your valleys and the Longphort reavers burn your halls. We stand together, or we fall one by one." The debate rages for a day and a night. But the fear of the Norman Longphort alliance is greater than their pride. They see the logic in Owain's words. At dawn, a consensus is reached. They will do it. They will elect a Pendragon. Then Owain does something that shocks them all. "I am too old for this fight," he says, his voice heavy. "My time is in the past. The Pendragon must be a man for the future." He turns and points to a quiet, powerfully built man in his prime, a warrior known for his tactical brilliance and his unshakable piety. "I nominate Arthur ap Cadwallon, King of Ceredigion. He has fought the Norse Celts on the coast and the Saxons on the border. He understands both foes. He has the strength to lead us. Arthur ap Cadwallon, a man whose name echoes the greatest of the old heroes, is elected by the acclamation of the assembled kings. He kneels before Owain, who places a simple, ancient iron circlet on his head. When he rises, he is no longer just a king. He is the Pendragon, the commander of the armies of all Prydein. His first words are not of glory, but of grim purpose. Magnus ap Hywel has made a pact with our enemies. He is no longer Brython. He is a cancer in the body of this island. We will cut him out. The army of Prydein will march west. Send the call to every kingdom. We march on Moan." A great roar echoes through the hall. For the first time, a truly unified political and military command has been forged in Prydein. It is not a Roman invention imposed from without, but a Celtic solution born of desperate necessity. The dual pressures of the rebellious Longphort kingdoms and the consolidating powers of the continent have acted as a hammer and anvil, forcing the fractured Brythonic kingdoms to fuse into a single, harder entity. The age of the Pendragon has begun. The year is 1054. On the continent, a tremor shakes the foundations of the Christian world. Cardinal Humbert, the legate of Pope Leo IX, strides into the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople and places a papal bull of excommunication upon the high altar, denouncing the Patriarch Michael Kerularios as a heretic. The Patriarch, in turn, excommunicates the cardinal. The two great lungs of the Church, the Latin West and the Greek East, finally and formally cease to breathe in unison. The Great Schism has begun. In Rome, in Paris, in the German lands, the news is received with grim finality. It is a tragedy, a rending of the seamless garment of Christ. But for the most part, it is a conflict far away, a matter of incomprehensible Greek theology and political rivalry. But in Prydein, the news is heard very differently. You are in the scriptorium of the great monastery at Bangor Fawr, the intellectual heart of the Insular Church. The abbot, a learned man named Soulien, has just received the news from a merchant ship returned from Rouen. He reads the letter, his face grim. He does not see it as a distant squabble. He sees it as the final, horrifying proof of everything the Insular Church has feared for centuries. He sees the culmination of a creeping sickness of the soul that has consumed both Rome and Constantinople. For the Church of Prydein, the last century has been one of trial by fire. The first Pendragon, Arthur ap Cadwallon, succeeded in his great campaign. He drove the Normans from their coastal foothold and broke the power of the treasonous Longphort lord Magnus ap Hywel. The Norman knights were as devastating as feared, and the cost in blood was immense. The Norman presence was a taste of a new, more aggressive, and centrally organised form of Roman Catholicism that saw the insular traditions not just as different, but as fundamentally wrong. In the decades that followed, the pressure from the continent has only grown. Norman power has consolidated. Popes in Rome, emboldened by the Cluniac reforms, have begun to assert their authority with a vigour not seen in centuries. They send letters to the kings of Prydein, addressing them as wayward sons and demanding they abandon their primitive customs, correct their date of Easter, and submit their bishops to the authority of the Archbishop of Canterbury, a see that, in this timeline, is a minor Roman mission in the pagan Saxon lands of Ioaga, but which Rome insists is the rightful primate of the entire island. Each demand has been politely but firmly refused. The kings of Prydein, their authority now buttressed by the military power of the Pendragon, see no reason to bow to a foreign priest. Their own church, the Church of the Isles, has served them well. It is their own. Why would they trade this for a foreign yoke? Now, sitting in the scriptorium, Abbot Soulien sees the path forward with chilling clarity. He gathers the senior monks around him, men whose minds have been sharpened by the study of Scripture, the Celtic epics, and the classical philosophy they have so carefully preserved. He says, his finger tapping the letter from Rouen. It is as our fathers at the Synod of the Isles foretold. The churches of the emperors have finally choked on their own pride. He begins to lay out his argument, a theological and political thesis that has been building in the intellectual circles of Prydein for a generation. Look at the Church of Rome. It has become a worldly kingdom, a thing of armies and tax collectors. The Pope crowns emperors and meddles in the wars of princes. He claims universal authority not through holiness, but through a chain of legal inheritance, like a duke arguing over a patch of land. He has forgotten the humility of Christ. He has embraced the worldly power of Caesar. And look to the east, he continues, his voice filled with a scholar's disdain. The patriarch serves at the pleasure of the emperor. Their faith is a thing of endless, hair-splitting debates over the nature of the Trinity, a philosophical game for idle Greeks while the armies of the infidel gather at their gates. They have forgotten the simple fire of the Gospels. They have embraced the empty sophistry of Athens. Soulien stands and walks to a great map of the known world painted on a stretched piece of vellum. They are two sides of the same debased coin. Both have yoked the faith to the chariot of imperial power. Both have forgotten the true church. The church of the ascetic. The church of the scholar. The church of the missionary. The church that walks the land and speaks to the people in their own tongue. The church that finds God not in a palace, but in the wilderness. He taps the island of Prydein on the map. They have forgotten our church, the church of Patrick, of Colmcille, of Finton. His words ignite the room. This is the intellectual framework they have been searching for, a way to transform their isolation from a weakness into a sign of their unique virtue. They are not a backwater. They are the last bastion of true, uncorrupted Christianity. The idea spreads like wildfire. It is preached from the pulpits of the monasteries. It is debated in the halls of the kings. It resonates deeply with a people who have spent centuries defining themselves against outsiders. The Pendragon of the time, a shrewd warrior named Gruffydd, sees its immense political power. An independent church requires an independent kingdom. A declaration of spiritual autonomy is also a declaration of permanent political autonomy. It is a final severing of ties with the continent's power structures. Gruffydd calls a new council, not as grand as the Synod of the Isles, but with a more radical purpose. He summons the chief abbots and the handful of bishops of the Insular Church to his court at Deganwy. There, Abbot Sulian formally presents his thesis, now written down as a powerful polemical document titled De Vera Ecclesia, on the True Church. The document argues that with the mutual excommunication of Rome and Constantinople, both apostolic sees have forfeited their claim to universality. They have succumbed to the sin of superbia, of pride. By cutting themselves off from each other, they have cut themselves off from the body of Christ. The document declares that the true apostolic tradition, the pure, unadulterated faith, now resides only in the Insular Church, which has remained aloof from their imperial corruptions. It is a breathtakingly bold claim. It does not just declare independence, it claims superiority. The council unanimously agrees. With the Pendragon seal and the assent of all the great churchmen, a formal declaration is drawn up. It is to be sent to the Pope in Rome, to the Patriarch in Constantinople, and to every major king in Christendom. The document becomes known as the Gallic Schism. Gallic being the continental term for all things related to the Celtic-speaking peoples. It formally declares that the Insular Church, encompassing all the faithful in Prydein, Ireland, and Armorica, is an autocephalous and independent patriarchate. It recognises neither the authority of the Pope nor the ecumenical patriarch. It excommunicates any who attempt to assert authority over it. It proclaims itself the third and only remaining true branch of the universal church. The reaction from the continent is one of stunned disbelief, followed by outrage. In Rome, the Pope denounces the Pendragon and the abbots of Prydein as schismatics and heretics of the worst sort, drunk on their own savage pride. He calls upon the princes of Europe to one day take up the cross and bring this lost island back into the fold of civilization. In the lands of the Franks and the Germans, the Insular Church becomes a byword for heresy, its followers seen as barely better than the pagans they live alongside. But in Prydein, the declaration is a moment of profound national unity and self-confidence. They have taken their greatest perceived weakness, their isolation, and forged it into their defining strength. They are no longer a strange anomaly on the edge of the Roman world. They are, in their own minds, the centre of the Christian world. This act of theological defiance carves a permanent chasm between the island and the continent. Prydein is now truly on its own, a unique civilization, charting its own course, guided by its own spiritual star. The Gallic Schism ensures that any future interaction with the powers of Europe will be not as a prodigal son, but as a determined and hostile rival. The year is 1066. A comet, a fiery star with a woman's hair, blazes across the night sky, and across Europe, men look up and see an omen of war and the fall of kings. On the continent, the omen proves true. Edward the Confessor, the Anglo-Saxon King of England, has died childless, leaving a power vacuum that draws predators from across the sea. Harold Godwinson seizes the throne, only to be challenged by Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway, and, most formidably, by William, Duke of Normandy. In our history, this three-way struggle for the crown of England culminates in the Battle of Hastings, a single day's bloody work that will forever change the destiny of the island. But on this side of the timeline's divide, there is no England to fight over. The eastern lands of Loeg remain a patchwork of squabbling, pagan, Saxon, and Anglian kingdoms, a fractured frontier that has never been unified into a single Christian state. The great prize, the unified, wealthy kingdom, lies to the west. You are in the court of William, Duke of Normandy. He is a formidable figure, the bastard, now grown into a ruthless and brilliant ruler. His ambition is boundless, his piety absolute, and his army the most feared in Europe. For years, he has looked across the water at Prydein with a mixture of avarice and holy fervour. He sees a rich land, a kingdom that controls the western sea lanes, but he also sees a nest of heretics, a people who have formally renounced the authority of the Holy Father in Rome, a festering wound in the side of Christendom. The Pope, Nicholas II, has given William his blessing, a papal banner to carry. His preparations are immense. He gathers a fleet of hundreds of ships, an army of thousands of knights, archers, and foot soldiers. His target is the unified kingdom of Prydein, a far more formidable opponent than the Anglo-Saxon state of our timeline. Prydein is ruled by the Pendragon Reign ap Gruffudd, a veteran of countless border wars, a man who commands a fierce, unified army. Its coasts are defended by the powerful fleets of the Longphort lords, who, since the defeat of their treasonous ancestor Magnus, have become the loyal, if fiercely independent, navy of the Pendragon. William knows a direct assault would be a desperate gamble. Prydein is a militarized state, hardened by centuries of warfare. Its terrain, a landscape of hills, forests, and bogs, is a nightmare for heavy cavalry. Its people are united by a fervent, almost fanatical devotion to their independent church and a deep hatred of foreign interference. A frontal invasion could easily bog down into a disastrous guerrilla war. William is a gambler, but not a fool. He seeks a crack in the wall, and he finds one. The Longphort kingdoms, while loyal to the Pendragon in the face of external threats, remain a disruptive element in the internal politics of Prydein. They are sea people, traders, and raiders. The current Lord of the Isles, a canny and ambitious sea king named Svein Olafsson, his very name a testament to his mixed heritage, is locked in a bitter feud with the Pendragon. It is not a matter of treason, but of economics. The Pendragon has levied a heavy tax on Svein's trade revenues to fund a new series of fortifications along the Saxon frontier. Svein, whose own lands are far from the Saxon threat, feels he is being forced to pay for the defence of the inland dirt farmers. He has refused to pay, and his fleet, the key to Prydein's naval defence, now sits idle in his harbours. This is the crack William was looking for. He does not sail his vast fleet to the shores of Prydein. He sends a single ship, carrying not soldiers, but a silver-tongued envoy. The message he sends to Pendragon Reign is a masterpiece of cunning diplomacy. It arrives at the Pendragon's court in Caerleon. The Norman envoy, a bishop fluent in Brythonic, is granted an audience. He unrolls the parchment and reads William's words. The Duke, he proclaims, has no desire for a war between Christian peoples. But he is a servant of the Holy Father, and he cannot stand by while the heretical pagan Saxons of Yoga defile a land that could be brought to Christ. Furthermore, he is sworn to put down the rebellious Norse-Celtic sea lords who have been preying on Frankish shipping for a generation. Then comes the offer, the poison hidden in a golden cup. Duke William offers to place his army at the service of the Pendragon. He will come to Prydein not as a conqueror, but as an ally. He offers a contingent of 1,000 of his finest knights, under his personal command, to serve as a mercenary force under the Pendragon's authority for a period of 5 years. Their mission, to help the Pendragon finally crush the Saxon pagans in the east, and to bring the rebellious Longphort lord, Svein Olafsson, to heel. In return, William asks only for a modest payment in silver and the rights to establish a permanent, peaceful trading post at a single port on the south coast. He even offers to leave his eldest son as a hostage at the Pendragon's court to guarantee his good faith. The Pendragon's council is thrown into turmoil. They see the trap. To invite a Norman army onto Prydein's soil is madness. The abbot of Bangorfar warns them with fiery passion. Do not listen to the serpent's tongue. His trading post will become a fortress. His mercenaries will become an occupying army. He offers you a sword to slay your enemies, but its hilt is in his hand, and he will turn the blade against you when your back is turned. But Pendragon Rain is tempted. He is a military man, and the offer is a military dream. 1,000 Norman knights represent a force of immense, perhaps decisive, power. It would be enough to shatter the Saxon shield walls in a single campaign to end the threat from Loga forever. It would also give him the leverage he needs to crush the insolent Svein Olafsson and finally bring the Longphort kingdoms under the direct, centralized control of the crown. He imagines a future where Prydein is completely unified, its ancient enemies vanquished, its internal divisions healed, and he convinces himself that he is strong enough to control the Normans, to use them and then send them away. He accepts William's offer. He calls it the Norman bargain. A few months later, William of Normandy lands on the south coast of Prydein. He does not land as an invader, but as a guest, an ally. He is greeted by Pendragon Rain. The two great leaders meet. A study in contrasts. Rain, the Celtic warrior king, tall and imposing, in his brightly coloured tunic and flowing moustache. William, the Norman duke, clean-shaven, his head shaved high in the back, encased in a practical, unadorned coat of mail. William publicly kneels and pays homage to Rain, acknowledging him as his commander. His knights, 1,000 of them, a river of steel and horseflesh, do the same. The first campaign is a stunning success. The combined Brythonic Norman army marches against the Longphort lord, Svein Olafsson. Svein's fleet is supreme at sea, but on land, his warriors are no match for the disciplined charge of the Norman knights. His coastal fortress is taken in a single, brutal assault. Svein himself is captured and forced to swear a binding oath of fealty to the Pendragon, his fleet and his kingdom's wealth, now under Rain's direct control. The victory solidifies Rain's belief that he has made the right choice. He has used the Normans to solve his most intractable internal problem. He has centralized his kingdom in a way no Pendragon before him ever could. Now, he turns his eyes east, to the final enemy, the Saxons. He believes he is on the cusp of total victory, the master of his own destiny. But as he watches the Norman knights train in their encampment, he feels a growing unease. He watches their efficiency, their discipline, their utter ruthlessness. They are not like his own warriors, who fight for personal glory and loyalty to their chieftain. And he notices how they are quietly, methodically mapping the land, noting the locations of fortresses, the state of the roads, the depths of the rivers. But they are also intelligence officers, conducting the most thorough survey of his kingdom ever undertaken. He has invited the wolf into his fold to help him kill a fox, but he is beginning to realize that a well-fed wolf does not simply leave when the hunt is over. It looks for its next meal. The year is 1200. A century and a half has passed since the Norman bargain, the fateful decision that invited the fox into the henhouse. The wolf, as Pendragon Rain had belatedly feared, did not leave. Their victory was one of slow, creeping, and inexorable influence. The Pendragons found their Norman mercenaries too useful to dismiss, and the Normans found Prydein too rich a prize to abandon. They became a permanent fixture, a sword for hire that slowly, subtly, began to set the kingdom's agenda. Their mercenary captains were granted lands and titles, marrying into the Brythonic nobility, creating a new, powerful Hiberno-Norman aristocracy that spoke Brythonic with a French accent, and whose loyalty was always, ultimately. Prydein was not conquered, but it was profoundly and permanently changed. The raw, wild spirit of the Insular Church, which had once defined itself by its fierce independence, was now locked in a cold war with a powerful, confident Roman Catholic faction within its own borders, centred on the Norman lords. The military might of the Pendragon was now dependent on a Norman-style heavy cavalry that was slowly supplanting the old Brythonic ways of war. The island had turned a corner, but fire, when it is contained, can forge as well as destroy. And in the great monasteries of the West, far from the Norman-influenced courts of the East, the very pressure of this foreign influence created a reaction of stunning intellectual and cultural brilliance. Fearing their unique identity was being eroded, the monks of the Insular Church redoubled their efforts to preserve and celebrate it. They saw the Roman Church's emphasis on logic and scholasticism, and they responded by delving deeper into their own traditions of mystical theology, poetry, and the preservation of classical learning. The threat of cultural extinction sparked a renaissance. You are walking through the cloisters of Llanbadarn Fawr, a monastery on the western coast of Prydein that has become one of the premier universities in all of Europe. It does not look like the new universities of Paris or Bologna. There are no grand lecture halls filled with students arguing the finer points of Aristotle. The university is a decentralized community of scholars. You see clusters of monks and lay students gathered under the shade of ancient oak trees, debating philosophy. You see scribes in the scriptorium, their heads bent over manuscripts, not just of the Gospels, but of Virgil, Ovid, and Plato texts that had been preserved here for centuries, while they were lost or ignored on much of the continent. The curriculum at Llanbadarn Fawr is unlike any other. It is built on a foundation of the three lights. The first light is Scripture, studied through the lens of their own insular saints and their mystical, nature-focused theology. The second light is classical wisdom, the philosophy, science, and poetry of Greece and Rome. But as a divinely permitted seeking in the dark that finds its fulfillment in the Christian revelation, the third, and most unique, light is the Saifar Widid, the storied knowledge of their own people, the contents of the Leibhar Mor Prydein, and the vast corpus of oral tradition that the bards and lawmasters had passed down for 1,000 years. Here, a student does not choose between studying theology, philosophy, or literature. A lecture on the Gospel of John might include a detailed comparison with Plato's theory of forms and an analysis of how the concept of the divine logos is reflected in the magical word of power from a Celtic epic. This synthesis creates a unique intellectual tradition, one that is less concerned with rigid logical proofs and more interested in finding the connections, the echoes, the rhymes between different forms of wisdom. This scholarly flame attracts the brightest and most discontented minds from across Europe. You see a young scholar from the German lands, weary of the endless, dry scholastic debates over nominalism and realism, sitting rapt as a Brythonic master, explains the Trinity using a three-leafed shamrock, a classic teaching of the Irish saints. You see a poet from Lombardy who has made the dangerous journey across the sea, dangerous because Prydein is still considered a heretical land, just to gain access to Llanbadarn's famed collection of pre-Christian Latin poetry. The monasteries of Prydein and their sister houses in Ireland become famous for two things. First, their unparalleled mastery of Greek. While knowledge of Greek had all but vanished in the Latin West, the Irish monastic tradition had always maintained a connection to the learning of the Eastern Desert Fathers, and they had preserved the language. A scholar who wants to read Plato or the New Testament in its original language has few choices. He can go to the hostile world of Byzantium, or he can come to the heretical but intellectually vibrant universities of Prydein. Second, they develop a unique school of medicine. On the continent, medicine is becoming a purely textual exercise, a matter of studying the received wisdom of Galen. Here, the Insular Church's deep-seated belief in the divine presence in the natural world leads to a different path. The monks blend the texts of Galen and Hippocrates with their own ancient, Druidic-derived knowledge of herbalism. They create vast medicinal gardens, and their approach is practical and observational. They believe that God has placed a cure for every illness in the plants of the earth, if one has the wisdom to find it. The physicians of Midfai, a lineage of doctors trained at the monastery of that name, become legendary. Their remedies and diagnostic skills sought by rulers across the continent, even by those who condemn their souls as heretical. This intellectual flourishing has a profound effect on the culture of Prydein. It creates a deep-seated respect for learning and poetry that permeates all levels of society. The most honoured figure in a king's court, second only to the king himself, a master of the complex rules of metre and alliteration, who is also a historian and a keeper of the royal genealogy. But this golden age of learning exists under a permanent shadow. The Norman Brythonic lords in the east, with their castles and their Roman priests, look upon these Western monasteries with suspicion. They see them as hotbeds of political resistance and spiritual rebellion. The Pope in Rome hears tales of the strange, syncretic learning of Prydein and condemns it as pagan superstition masquerading as Christian scholarship. You witness a tense encounter that perfectly encapsulates this conflict. A Norman bishop, a man named Robert de Montfort, has come to Llanbadarn Fawr on a mission from the Pendragon's court. He is there to inspect the monastery's teachings. He sits in on a lecture by the abbot, a brilliant scholar named Reshapes. Reshapes is discussing the creation story in Genesis, but he illustrates his points with references to the Celtic creation myths and the cosmological theories of the pre-Socratic Greek philosophers. Bishop Robert is horrified. After the lecture, he confronts the abbot. "This is heresy," he sputters, his face red with indignation. "You are mixing the sacred word of God with the foolish fables of pagans and the babbling of Greek atheists. There is one truth, and it is found in the Holy Scripture, as interpreted by the Church Fathers and the See of Rome." Reshapes looks at him not with anger, but with a kind of weary pity. "My Lord Bishop," he says, his voice calm and measured, "you see a field of weeds and demand that we burn it, leaving only the one true crop. We see a garden, planted by God, in which many different flowers grow, each with its own beauty and its own truth. You believe truth is a fortress, with high walls to keep error out. We believe it is a great river, fed by many streams. Your Roman road is straight, but our Celtic path wanders through the hills and valleys, and sees more of the world. We will not abandon our path." The bishop leaves in a fury, vowing to report this blatant heresy to the Pendragon and to Rome. The threat is real. The scholarly flame burns brighter than ever, but the winds from the continent are rising, and the shadows are growing longer. The very intellectual vibrancy that defines Prydein has also marked it as a target, an island of beautiful, dangerous ideas that the rest of Europe is becoming increasingly determined to extinguish. The year is 1350. The world you see from the shores of Prydein is one that has been profoundly shaped by the island's long centuries of independence. The Norman presence has been absorbed and Celticized over generations. The Hiberno-Norman lords are now just another powerful clan, their castles and cavalry integrated into the Prydein war machine. The religious Cold War with Rome is a permanent, simmering fact of life. But it is not in the courts of kings or the cloisters of monks that Prydein's unique destiny is now being forged. It is on the wind-whipped, salt-sprayed decks of its merchant ships, in the bustling, chaotic harbours of its western ports. Prydein, a nation whose power was once measured in cattle and warriors, has become the master of the Atlantic trade routes. Its lifeblood, the sea itself. This economic transformation is a direct consequence of the island's strange history. Prydein never developed the feudal, manorial economy of the continent. Without the rigid, hierarchical grid of Roman land division to build upon, its society remained more fluid, more tribal. This made it a less efficient producer of bulk agricultural surplus than, for example, France. But it also meant that its people were not tied to the land in the same way. This, combined with the sea-going legacy of the Longphort kingdoms, created a large population of men who looked to the sea for their livelihood. They were fishermen, traders, sailors, and, when opportunity arose, pirates. You are standing on the docks of Aberdaugil Dow, a port town in the heart of what was once the Longphort kingdom of Diverted. The harbour is a forest of masts, but the ships are not the cogs of the Hanseatic League or the galleys of the Mediterranean. They are a unique vessel, the ultimate expression of Prydein's hybrid culture. the Morlong. It is a ship that combines the clinker-built hull and shallow draft of a Viking longship, giving it speed and the ability to navigate shallow rivers with the deeper, wider belly and the high forecastle and aft castle of a continental cog. Most importantly, it carries a revolutionary new rigging, a combination of a large square sail for power in a following wind and a smaller, triangular lateen sail at the stern, an idea borrowed from Iberian sailors which allows the ship to sail much more effectively against the wind. The Morlong is the finest ocean-going vessel in the Atlantic. The trade that flows through this harbour is the lifeblood of the kingdom. You see ships unloading barrels of wine and iron from Bordeaux, a trade made possible by Prydein's close ties with the fiercely independent Duchy of Aquitaine, which sees Prydein as a useful ally against the ambitions of the French king. You see ships laden with fine, dyed wool, the primary export of the island, bound for the weaving towns of Flanders. But the most important trade is the one that follows the old Viking sea roads north. You board a Morlong captained by a man named Madog Abiorworth. He is a typical Prydein sea captain, a man of mixed Norse-Celtic ancestry, a devout follower of the Insular Church who nonetheless has a string of Norse sea god tattoos running up his arm, just in case. His destination is the far north, a journey into the cold, grey wilderness of the Atlantic. They sail north, past the rugged coasts of Ireland, to the Norse-Celtic earldom of Orkney, a semi-independent client state of Prydein. Here they trade for dried fish and valuable walrus ivory. Then they push further into the open ocean, navigating not by compass, a device still seen as an unreliable novelty, but by the sun, the stars, the flight of seabirds, and the colour and swell of the water, an intimate, almost instinctive knowledge of the sea passed down through generations. Their destination is Iceland, a land of volcanoes and glaciers, settled centuries ago by Norsemen and Irish monks. In this timeline, without the unifying pull of a powerful Norwegian kingdom, Iceland has remained more closely tied to the Celtic world. It is Prydein's most important trading partner. In the Icelandic port of Reykjavik, Madog unloads his cargo of Prydein wool, honey, and iron tools. In return, he takes on the goods that make this perilous journey worthwhile: barrels of sulphur, scraped from the volcanic vents, a key ingredient in gunpowder, a new and terrifying technology that is beginning to change the face of warfare. He buys priceless gyfalcons, the white hunting birds coveted by every king in Europe, and he buys tales, maps, and rumours from the Icelandic sailors, men who have pushed even further west. They speak of a land called Greenland, a struggling Norse colony on the very edge of the world, and they speak of older, stranger stories, inherited from the Irish monks who came here first, tales of a blessed land, a St. Brendan's Isle, far to the west across the ocean, a land of impossible fertility and warmth. These stories are dismissed by the learned in Europe as fantasy, but here, in the salty air of the North Atlantic, they feel like a plausible destination. The return journey takes Madog south, along the Great Atlantic Highway. He sails to the port of Lisbon in Portugal, another kingdom that values its independence from its larger neighbours, and sees Prydein as a natural, non-threatening maritime ally. Here, he sells his Icelandic sulphur and falcons for a fabulous profit and loads his ship with salt, cork, and dried fruits for the home market. This vast, circular trade route, Prydein to Iceland, Iceland to Iberia, Iberia back to Prydein, is the engine of the kingdom's wealth. It is a trade network that exists entirely outside the control of the dominant economic powers of the day. The Italian city-states of the Mediterranean and the Hanseatic League of the Baltic. Prydein's heresy has made it a pariah to many, but it has also forced it to be self-reliant, to build its own economic world in the only place left to it. This sea-based economy has profound social consequences. It creates a powerful new merchant class in the port towns, men like Madog, whose wealth rivals that of the old landed aristocracy. It fosters a spirit of pragmatic innovation, a constant drive to build better ships, to draw more accurate charts, to find a faster, safer route, and it reinforces Prydein's sense of separation from the continent. Their backs are turned to Europe, their faces are turned to the sea, to the west. As Madog's ship finally makes landfall back in Aberdaugl Dow, you see the wealth the sea brings. You see stone houses for the merchants, a new, larger church being built with donations from the sailors' guilds. But you also see the price. You see the widows of men who sailed north and never returned. You see the brutal, competitive nature of the docks, where a dispute over cargo can be settled with a knife. It is a dynamic, prosperous, and dangerous world. The Pendragon and the inland lords are still the political masters of Prydein, but they are becoming increasingly dependent on the wealth generated by these sea people. The silver that pays for the soldiers who guard the Saxon frontier is earned in the icy waters off Iceland and the sunny ports of Portugal. Power is slowly but surely shifting from the hill fort to the harbour, from the landed warrior to the seagoing merchant. The soul of Prydein may have been forged in the monastic scriptoriums, but its future is being written in the logbooks of the Atlantic sea captains. The island kingdom, once a fortress, is becoming a fleet. The year is 1348. A ghost is stalking Europe. It moves silently, invisibly, along the trade routes, a passenger on every ship, a companion to every traveller. It is the Great Pestilence, the Black Death, a biological storm of unimaginable fury that will scythe through the continent, leaving a landscape of death and desolation in its wake. No kingdom, no matter how powerful, no matter how remote, can escape it. It arrives, as all things now do, by sea. It comes ashore in the bustling port of Aberdaugl Dow, carried in the fleas on the rats in the hold of a wine ship from Bordeaux. At first, it is just a rumour, a mariner's fever that sweeps through the crowded, unsanitary dockside districts. It moves with the wool merchants and the tin traders, following the trackways and rivers into the heartland. The symptoms are terrifying and new. A sudden, burning fever, followed by the appearance of grotesque, blackened swellings, the buboes in the groin and armpits. Then comes the coughing of blood, a sign of the pneumonic form of the plague, and with it, the certainty of a swift and agonizing death. Within a year, a third of the island's population is dead. The old and the young, the rich and the poor, the holy and the wicked, the plague is terrifyingly indiscriminate. The fields lie fallow, for there are not enough hands to bring in the harvest. The villages fall silent. Entire families wiped out in a single week. The response from the two poles of Prydein's spiritual life is immediate and utterly different. The Norman-influenced Roman Catholic faction in the east reacts as their brethren do on the continent. Their priests preach that the plague is the wrath of a vengeful God, a punishment for the sins of mankind. They call for repentance, for fasting, for prayer. Processions of flagellants march through the towns, whipping their own backs to atone for the world's wickedness, their desperate piety only serving to spread the pneumonic plague more effectively. Their theology offers a framework of sin and judgment, but it provides little comfort and no practical solutions. But the Insular Church, in the ancient monastic centres of the West, responds from a place of deep, almost primordial instinct. Their faith, baptized from the island's own pre-Christian spirituality, has never seen God as a distant, judgmental monarch. It sees the divine as immanent, a power woven into the very fabric of the natural world. They do not see the plague as a punishment from God, but as a disharmony in God's creation. The world is out of balance. A great sickness has entered the land, a spiritual as well as a physical affliction, and the proper response is not just to appease God, but to heal the land itself. You are with a monk named Brother Callan, one of the famed physicians of Maidfi. He is not hiding in his monastery, praying for deliverance. He is walking the empty roads, his satchel filled with herbal remedies. He moves through a landscape of fear. The villages are shuttered, a crude red cross painted on the doors of the plague houses. In the fields, the unmilked cattle cry out in pain. Callan does not have a cure for the plague. He knows his poultices and herbal infusions can only ease the suffering of the victims, not save them. But his work is not just medicinal, it is spiritual. He arrives at a small village where the local priest has died, and the people are paralyzed with terror. They have dragged the bodies from their homes and left them in a shallow pit, afraid to even give them a proper burial. Callan, his face covered with a cloth soaked in vinegar, goes to the pit. He does not see the bodies as vessels of sin. He begins to chant the office for the dead in the old Brythonic tongue, his voice a lonely anchor in a sea of fear. He shows the villagers that the dead must be honoured, that the cycles of life and death, even when they are this cruel, are still sacred. But the Insular Church's response goes deeper than this. In the great libraries of Bangor and Lambadinfar, the abbots and scholars turn not just to the Bible, but to the other pillar of their wisdom, the cipher Widid, the ancient, pre-Christian law of their people. Preserved in the Leibhar Mór Prydein, they reread the old myths, the stories of lands laid waste by magical plagues, of heroes who had to perform sacred rituals to restore the kingdom's health. They see the Black Death not as a new problem, but as a new manifestation of a very old one. A radical idea begins to take hold. They come to believe that the balance of the world has been upset by the people's neglect of the land itself. They have become too focused on their sea trade, on their wars, on their theological disputes. They have forgotten the old pacts, the deep spiritual connection to the soil, the rivers, the mountains. The plague is the land's fevered response. And so, a strange and powerful revival begins. Abbots and monks, the most learned men in the kingdom, begin to preach the necessity of returning to the old ways, not as an act of paganism, but as a Christian duty to heal God's wounded creation. They organize new rituals consciously designed to restore the lost harmony. You witness one such ceremony on the eve of Calan Mai, the ancient festival of Beltane. Atop a great hill fort, overlooking the plague-ravaged countryside, two great bonfires are lit. The remaining cattle of the village are driven between the flames, a pre-Christian act of purification that has been practiced in secret for centuries. Now, it is led by the local abbot. He blesses the fire in the name of the Trinity. But he also invokes the name of the local saint, who happens to be the patron of a nearby river, a figure who has absorbed the identity of the old river goddess. The people are taught to leave offerings at the holy wells once more, not to the old spirits. The priests are careful to explain, but as prayers to God through the intercession of the local saint who sanctified the well. The ancient standing stones, the menhirs, become sites of pilgrimage again, places where people pray for the health of the land. This is not a rejection of Christianity. It is the ultimate expression of their unique, syncretic faith. They are delving into their own cultural DNA to find the antibodies to fight this new disease. They are re-sacralizing the landscape, reminding the people that their health is inextricably tied to the health of the world around them. The social and political consequences are enormous. The flagellant movements of the Roman faction are seen as a foreign, hysterical madness, and their influence wanes. The Insular Church, with its practical, compassionate, and culturally resonant response, emerges from the crucible of the plague with its authority immensely strengthened. The revival of these ancient folk practices, now sanctioned and led by the Church, further deepens the cultural chasm between Prydein and the continent. To a visiting papal envoy, this would look like a horrifying descent into open paganism. To the people of Prydein, it feels like a homecoming, a rediscovery of the deepest roots of their identity. The Black Death leaves Prydein scarred and diminished, its population shattered, but it does not break its spirit. Instead, it has triggered a profound spiritual and cultural immune response. The island turns inward, not in fear, but in a search for its oldest sources of strength. The focus on the sea and foreign trade is temporarily forgotten, replaced by an urgent, almost mystical need to reconnect with the land itself. The plague that ravaged their bodies has, in a strange and terrible way, healed a sickness in their soul. A people whose destiny is tied not to the great empires of the continent, but to the sacred soil of their own misty island. The year is 1490. The Black Death is a living memory, a ghost that haunts the stories of the old. But the world has recovered. The population of Prydein has rebounded, and with it, the restless, outward-looking energy of its seagoing people. Instead, it infused its national identity with a renewed sense of confidence and divine purpose. The people of Prydein, having stared into the abyss and survived by drawing on their deepest cultural roots, now look out at the world not with fear, but with a unique and unshakable sense of their own destiny. The sea lanes are once again teeming with the sleek moorlong ships. The Atlantic trade with Iceland and Iberia is more prosperous than ever. But the world is changing. To the south, the Iberian kingdoms of Castile and Portugal, having completed their Reconquista, are turning their energies outward. Their shipyards are producing new kinds of vessels, caravels designed for long-distance ocean exploration. Their captains, armed with the compass and the astrolabe, are pushing south, down the coast of Africa, a way to bypass the Venetian and Ottoman stranglehold on the spice trade. In Prydein, the ambition is just as great, but its direction is different. Their gaze is not turned south, but west. You are in the port city of Bristol, a hub of the Atlantic trade, in a smoky tavern filled with sea captains, merchants, and Icelandic sailors. The air is thick with the smell of beer and sea salt, and the talk is of a new, daring venture. The man at the centre of the crowd is Llywelyn, a captain renowned for his skill and his almost obsessive belief in the lands to the west. Rhys is a product of the new Prydein. He is a devout Christian of the Insular Rite, but his faith is steeped in the ancient lore. He has read the tales of St. Brendan the Navigator in the Leab Mór Prydein. He has spent years in Iceland, listening to the old Norse sagas of Eric the Red and his son Leif, who sailed to a land called Vinland centuries ago. And he has heard the tales of the Irish monks who, it was said, travelled even before the Norse to a great Ireland across the sea. For a man of Prydein, these are not the myths of foreigners. They are the stories of his own cultural ancestors. For Rhys, the westward voyage is not just a matter of exploration or commerce. It is a pilgrimage, a sacred quest. The revival of the old ways after the plague has reinforced the idea of a deep connection between the people and the land. But it has also revived a strain of Celtic mythology that speaks of a blessed isle in the west, a land of eternal youth and abundance, known as Tir na Nog or An Non. Over the centuries, this idea has fused with the Christian concept of the Garden of Eden. The scholars of Llanbadarn Fawr have developed a unique theology suggesting that, while the original Eden in the east was lost to mankind, God, in his mercy, may have preserved a second paradise, an unfallen land, in the far west. Rhys ap Llywelyn has convinced a consortium of Bristol merchants to fund his expedition. They are hard-headed businessmen, more interested in new fishing grounds and potential markets than in theology. But they are also men of their time, and Rhys's passionate conviction is infectious. The Pendragon has given his official blessing, seeing the venture as a way to enhance the prestige of the kingdom and potentially find new resources, free from the interference of the continental powers. The expedition consists of 2 ships, not the large, cargo-carrying Morlongs, but smaller, nimbler vessels, heavily influenced by the design of the Portuguese caravel. Rhys's flagship is named the Brendan. His second ship is the Maelgwyn, named after a mythical hero king. They are packed with supplies for a journey of unknown length. Their crews are a mix of Brythonic sailors and veteran Icelandic Northmen who know the cold, dangerous waters of the high Atlantic. They set sail not from the south, following the path Columbus would take, but from the west coast of Ireland, pushing out into the North Atlantic, following the old Viking route. For weeks, they see nothing but the endless grey expanse of the ocean. The sailors grow restless and fearful, but Rhys, guided by his faith and his reading of the sagas, holds his course. He and his Icelandic navigator are masters of the old ways, reading the patterns of the waves, the colour of the water, the flight of gulls and petrels. After more than 2 months at sea, they see the signs they have been waiting for. a change in the watercolor, floating branches, and then a great flock of land-based birds flying west at sunset. The next morning, a lookout cries out from the masthead, "Land!" It is not a small island, but a vast, forested coastline, stretching as far as the eye can see in either direction. They have made landfall on the island they will name Yni's Newid, the new isle, our Newfoundland. The crew rows ashore, half mad with relief, and fall to their knees on the rocky beach, where Rhys leads them in a prayer of thanks, recited in the Brythonic tongue. They spend the summer exploring the coastline. They discover the unimaginably rich fishing grounds of the Grand Banks, teeming with cod to a degree that seems miraculous. This discovery alone would make the voyage a stunning success. But Rhys is searching for more. He is searching for signs of life, for the people of this new world. They find a deserted village of strange, conical huts made of bark. Inside, they find stone tools and artifacts of a simple hunter-gatherer people. Then, one day, they meet them, a small band of Beothuk people, their skin reddish-brown, their hair long and black. The initial encounter is tense. The Beothuk have never seen white men or great sailing ships. The Prydein sailors have never seen people like this. But here, the unique cultural baggage of Prydein makes all the difference. Rhys and his men are not conquistadors. They do not carry a papal bull granting them dominion over all heathen lands. They have no concept of a holy war to convert the unbelievers by force. Their own insular church was born from a process of syncretism and adaptation, not conquest. They see these people not as souls to be conquered for a distant pope, but as the children of this land, perhaps even the inhabitants of the unfallen Eden they were seeking. Communication is impossible, but Rhys approaches them with gestures of peace. He offers them gifts: a small iron knife, a string of glass beads. The Beothuk, in turn, offer them furs. A tentative, silent trade begins. Rhys and his men are fascinated by the Beothuk's deep connection to the natural world, a connection that resonates with their own recently revived old ways. They see a people who live in harmony with the forest and the sea, and they view them with a kind of respect, even awe. Before the harsh winter sets in, Rhys makes the decision to return. He leaves a small party of 30 men behind, not as a conquering garrison, but as a wintering party, with instructions to build a permanent camp, to continue the peaceful trade, and to learn what they can of this new world. He sails back to Prydein, his ship's holds filled with barrels of salted cod and a fortune in furs. His return in the spring of 1491 is a national event. He has not found a route to the spices of India, but he has found something else. He has found a new world, a vast, resource-rich land across the Western Ocean. The discovery electrifies Prydein. It confirms their deepest-held beliefs, that their destiny lies in the West, that they are a people apart, guided by God and their own unique history to a future separate from the squabbling, decadent kingdoms of Europe. The Western voyage does not trigger a gold rush or a crusade for souls. It triggers a slow, steady migration of fishermen, traders, and settlers, the beginning of a relationship with a new world that will be defined not by conquest and subjugation, but by the strange, syncretic, and surprisingly gentle spirit of the Insular Church. The island kingdom has found its new frontier. The year is 1550. 60 years have passed since Rhys ap Llywelyn's western voyage. The discovery of Ynis Newid and the vast continent beyond has become the central, defining fact of Prydein's national life. It has reshaped its economy, its politics, and its very soul. While the nations of the continent are tearing themselves apart in the brutal religious wars of the Protestant Reformation, a conflict that seems distant and incomprehensible to the people of Prydein, the island kingdom is consumed by its westward gaze, its energies focused on the slow, steady settlement of a new world. But now, a new technology has arrived, a force with the power to reshape societies as surely as any army or plague. From the workshops of a German goldsmith named Gutenberg, the printing press, with movable type, has spread across Europe. It has fanned the flames of the Reformation, allowing the ideas of Luther and Calvin to be mass-produced and distributed with a speed that the old world of scribes could never have imagined. And now, the press has come to Prydein. You are in the city of Caerphilly, which has become a major centre for this new craft. The first printing press in the kingdom was established here not by a merchant, but by the monks of the nearby monastery, who saw its potential immediately. But the purpose to which they put this new machine is profoundly different from its use on the continent. In Germany, the first book printed was the Latin Bible. In Prydein, the first major project is a magnificent, multi-volume, printed edition of the Leibhar Mor Prydein, the Great Book of Prydein. The decision is a conscious and deeply significant one. The council of abbots who commissioned the work saw the revolutionary power of the press, but they saw it as a tool not for theological debate, but for cultural consolidation. On the continent, the press was fracturing Christendom into 100 warring sects. Here, it would be used to ensure that every corner of the kingdom, every household that could read, would have access to the same foundational story of their people. You stand in the noisy, ink-stained workshop of the printer, a man named Ewan ap Rhys. The air hums with the rhythmic clatter and thud of the great wooden press. You see stacks of freshly printed pages, the Brythonic script sharp and clear, a perfect reproduction of the elegant calligraphy of the original manuscript. This is not just a book, it is a mass-produced national identity. For the first time, the sacred stories, the epic poems, the genealogies of the kings, and the laws of the land are available to more than just a handful of monks and nobles. A wealthy merchant, a ship's captain, a minor landowner, they can now own a copy of the national soul. The impact is immediate and profound. The press solidifies the Brythonic language, standardizing its spelling and grammar, giving it the permanence and prestige that had once been reserved for Latin. But more importantly, it cements a powerful, myth-based identity in the popular imagination. The heroic tales of Arthur ap Cadwallon, the first Pendragon, are now read and reread until they become historical fact in the minds of the people. The mystical voyages of St. Brendan become a literal blueprint for their own westward expansion. The ancient laws, now printed and widely available, reinforce their sense of being a people governed by their own unique and ancient traditions, not by some foreign Roman code. While Europe debates predestination and justification by faith, the best-selling printed books in Prydein are epic poems. New works, inspired by the discovery of the New World, become instant classics. A bard named Dafydd Goch writes Ynys y Gwir, the Isle of Truth, a sprawling epic poem that reimagines the voyage of Rhys ap Llywelyn as a divine quest, blending Christian theology with Celtic mythology and eyewitness accounts of the new land. It becomes the defining literary work of the age, memorized by schoolchildren, recited in taverns, its verses giving the people a powerful, romantic narrative for their colonial project. It frames the settlers not as conquerors, but as pilgrims returning to a long-lost paradise, the native peoples as the innocent guardians of an unfallen world. This printed culture has a direct impact on the developing relationship with the New World. On the continent, the Spanish conquest of the Americas is justified by printed theological tracts arguing for the doctrine of just war against heathens. In Prydein, the most influential texts are heroic poems that romanticize peaceful trade and coexistence. This doesn't mean the relationship is without conflict or exploitation, but it establishes a fundamentally different cultural script. The heroes of the Prydein colonial story are traders and explorers, not conquistadors. The press also serves as a formidable weapon in the long Cold War against Rome. Papal bulls denouncing the Insular Church are now quickly translated into Brythonic, printed with mocking woodcut illustrations, and distributed as objects of public ridicule. When a Roman Catholic scholar writes a dense, logical treatise in Latin attacking the heresy of the Insular Church, the monks of Bangor Fawr respond not with a point-by-point rebuttal, but by printing a short, witty, and fiercely satirical poem in the vernacular that is far more effective in shaping public opinion. You see the results of this in a conversation with a wool merchant in his comfortable stone house. On his shelf, you see his family's copy of the printed Great Book, its cover worn with use. He has been reading it to his children. He tells you, "The Roman priests say we are heretics because our saints calculated Easter by the wrong moon. But I read here of Saint Fintan, who slept on a cold stone and tamed the wild beasts with his holiness. I read the laws of our people, which are just and ancient. These are the things that matter. We know who we are. It is all here. In the book, let the Pope and his German fanatics argue about the moon. We have our own story. The printing press, the technology that is splintering the old medieval consensus of Europe, is having the opposite effect in Prydein. It is taking a unique, manuscript-based culture and hardening it into a permanent, mass-produced national identity. It has armed the people not just with literacy, but with a powerful and coherent narrative. They know their myths. They know their heroes. They know their laws. This deep sense of cultural self-assurance, now printed and bound, will be the bedrock upon which they build their future. Mysterious continent that lies across the Western Sea. The press did not bring the Reformation to Prydein. It brought the renaissance of a nation's soul. The year is 1650. The world has been irrevocably altered by the opening of the Americas. On the continent, the story of the New World is one of brutal conquest, of vast empires built on gold and silver, extracted by enslaved populations, of entire civilizations erased by the sword and by disease. The Spanish, the Portuguese, and now the French and the Dutch are carving up the southern and central parts of the continent, driven by an insatiable hunger for wealth and a crusading zeal to impose their version of Christianity upon the indigenous peoples. But to the north, along the rugged coastlines of the St. Lawrence River, the Great Lakes, and the lands that would have been New England, a profoundly different story has unfolded. This is the domain of Prydein, the heretic kingdom, the island nation that stumbled upon the New World by following its own myths. For a century and a half, their engagement with the continent they call Tir Nui De, the New Land, has been guided by a different set of imperatives, leading to the creation of a unique and deeply syncretic society that exists nowhere else on Earth. You are standing in the settlement of Albemarle, the Great Estuary, located on the site of our timeline's Quebec City. It is the largest and most important town in Prydein's American territories, but it is not a European city transplanted into the wilderness. It is something new, something hybrid. The architecture tells the story. You see sturdy stone buildings in the Brythonic style, with steep-pitched roofs to shed the heavy snow, clustered around a central market square. But interspersed among them, and ringing the settlement, are the longhouses of their allies, the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples. There is no clear dividing line, no wall separating the European from the indigenous. The town flows together. The reason for this is rooted in Prydein's founding principles for colonization, a stark contrast to the Spanish model. Prydein lacked the immense demographic pressure and the centralized state ambition for a massive war of conquest. Their early settlements in Inis Nuid, Newfoundland, were fishing and trading posts, not military garrisons. Their primary goal was not gold, of which there was little in the north, but the fur trade. And to trade for furs, you needed partners, not slaves. This economic necessity was reinforced by their cultural and religious worldview. Shaped by the Insular Church and the Romantic printed epics, the Prydein settlers arrived with a pre-existing respect for the indigenous peoples as inhabitants of a sacred, unfallen land. Their first missionaries were monks from the tradition of St. Columban, men trained in the art of syncretism. They did not arrive with soldiers to forcibly baptize entire villages. They came alone, or in pairs, to live among the people, to learn their language, to understand their worldview. You witness a religious service in Albemarle. It is held not in a stone church, but in a vast wooden longhouse, a space sacred to the Wendat. The priest is a Brython man, but he is married to a Wendat woman, and his face is tattooed with the symbols of her clan. He preaches in a fluid mixture of Brythonic and the Wendat tongue. The sermon blends the story of Christ's journey into the wilderness with the Wendat creation story of the Sky Woman. The Christian cross that hangs behind him is carved from driftwood and decorated with eagle feathers and sacred clan symbols. This is the Columban exchange, named not for Columbus, but for the missionary tradition of St. Columcille. A slow, patient, and mutual blending of cultures and beliefs. The result is a new, synthetic culture. You see it everywhere. The Prydein settlers, finding their heavy woolen clothing impractical for the harsh winters, have adopted the buckskin leggings and fur-lined parkas of their allies. Their diet is a mix of Prydein staples like bread and cheese, and the three sisters corn, beans, and squash of the Haudenosaunee. The children who play in the streets of Albemarle are almost all of mixed heritage, fluent in both languages, comfortable in both worlds. They are the first generation of a new people, the Cimbro-Algonquian, the Welsh-Algonquian. This fusion was not a peaceful idyll. The diseases the settlers brought with them, though not wielded as a deliberate weapon. It was based on alliance and kinship. The most important institution in Tir Nuid is not the colonial governor, but the trade alliance, a complex web of treaties between the Prydein settlements and the powerful indigenous confederacies, particularly the Haudenosaunee. These alliances are sealed not just with treaties, but with intermarriage, creating literal blood ties that bind the communities together. The Haudenosaunee, in this timeline, have had a different history. They were not ground down between warring French and English empires. Instead, they found in the Prydein settlers a reliable partner. The Prydein provided them with iron tools, textiles, and, crucially, but because Prydein's own military technology was less advanced than that of the major continental powers, the technological gap was never insurmountable. The Haudenosaunee were able to adopt firearms and integrate them into their own formidable style of warfare, allowing them to expand their own influence and become the dominant indigenous power in the region, with the Prydein settlements as their junior partners in a shared enterprise. The geopolitical map of North America in 1650 is therefore utterly alien to our eyes. To the south, New Spain is a vast, rigid, and exploitative empire. But north of the Chesapeake Bay, there is no New France, no New Netherland, no New England. There is a vast, fluid, and multicultural territory known as the Prydein-Haudenosaunee Alliance. Its power is projected not by European armies, but by fleets of canoes and war parties of Haudenosaunee warriors armed with Prydein muskets, fighting alongside their Cimbro-Algonquian kin. This has a profound feedback effect on the mother country. Prydein does not grow fabulously wealthy from gold and silver. Its wealth comes from a steady, sustainable trade in furs, timber, and fish. It does not develop a massive imperial bureaucracy because its colonies are not conquered provinces to be administered, but a network of semi-autonomous allied towns and tribes. The stories and people who come back from Tir Nuid infuse Prydein's own culture with new ideas, new words, and a new perspective. The idea of a confederacy, of a government based on consensus among allied nations as practiced by the Haudenosaunee, begins to influence political thought back in Prydein, offering a compelling alternative to the absolute monarchies rising on the continent. The Columban exchange is a two-way street. Prydein is not just changing the New World. The New World is fundamentally changing Prydein. It is creating a society that is more adaptable, more tolerant of cultural difference, and more oriented toward partnership than domination. It has achieved this not through superior virtue, but through the strange accidents of its own history: a late arrival, a lack of resources for conquest, and a religious tradition that valued syncretism over holy war. It has built not an empire, but a confederation, a bridge between two worlds. The year is 1750. You are standing on a high hill overlooking the city of Rhydychen, our Oxford, but it is a city transformed. The ancient university colleges are still there, their stone walls a testament to centuries of learning, but their spires now compete on the skyline with the smoking chimneys of foundries and the grand, secular facades of merchant guild halls. The world stage, once a simple, bipolar struggle between a monolithic Catholic Europe and its various challengers, has been irrevocably fractured into a new, complex, and unstable tripartite balance. The 2 centuries since the discovery of Tir Nuid have seen the seeds of Prydein's unique history blossom into a strange and powerful new civilization, a third pole in global affairs. The first pole is Catholic Europe, led by the mighty empires of Spain and Austria and the still powerful Kingdom of France. It is a world of absolute monarchy, Baroque art, and a resurgent, confident Catholicism shaped by the Council of Trent. It is a world of grand armies, rigid social hierarchies, and a colonial model based on extraction and conversion. Its intellectual life is dominated by a cautious, conservative scholasticism. The second pole is Protestant Europe, a dynamic, chaotic, and commercially aggressive collection of states in northern Germany, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia. Having shattered the unity of the old Catholic world, these nations are defined by their vibrant capitalism, their burgeoning scientific revolution, and a multiplicity of faiths. They are the great innovators, the bankers, the printers of radical new ideas. Their colonial ambitions are driven by trade and the formation of powerful chartered companies. And their rivalries are as much with each other as they are with the Catholic South. And then there is the third pole, the Insular Alliance. This is the power bloc centred on Prydein, but it is not a traditional empire. It is a maritime and commercial confederation, a network of alliances and partnerships that stretches from the home island to Ireland, Iceland, and, most importantly, across the Atlantic to the vast, multicultural Prydein-Haudenosaunee alliance in Tir Nuid. It is a civilization defined not by a shared dogma, but by a shared history of opposition to the continent. Prydein itself has been profoundly reshaped by this global role. The Pendragon still reigns, but his power is now balanced by a formidable Singor, a parliament dominated not by feudal lords, but by the wealthy sea captains, merchants, and bankers whose trade networks are the lifeblood of the nation. Their political philosophy, heavily influenced by the confederate model of their Haudenosaunee allies, is one of decentralization, of consensus, and a deep suspicion of absolute power. The Insular Church remains the soul of the nation, but it too has evolved. Its long intellectual tradition of synthesizing scripture, classics, and native law made it uniquely receptive to the dawn of the scientific revolution. Lacking a dogmatic, centralized authority like the papacy, its thinkers did not see the discoveries of Copernicus or Newton as a threat to faith. Instead, they viewed the scientific method as simply another tool, another light, for understanding God's immanent creation. The universities of Prydein have become world leaders in the natural sciences in botany, geology, and astronomy fields that flow naturally from their theology of a sacred, observable world. The military of the Insular Alliance is as hybrid as its culture. Prydein has a small but highly professional standing army. Its core, a regiment of heavy cavalry, descended from the Norman mercenaries. But its true strength lies in two other areas. First is its navy, the direct inheritor of the Longphort tradition, a fleet of fast, well-armed ships that patrol the Atlantic trade routes. Second, and most decisively, are the armies of its American allies. When the alliance goes to war, its most numerous and feared soldiers are the tens of thousands of Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Cimbro-Algonquian warriors who fight to defend their shared world. A European army invading Tir Nuid would not face a thin line of colonial militia. It would face a continental-scale guerrilla war, a green sea of forest warfare that no conventional army could hope to conquer. This balance of three powers has created a world of shifting alliances and constant, low-level proxy wars. You see it in the Caribbean, where Prydein privateers, allied with Dutch Protestants, raid Spanish treasure fleets. You see it in the forests of the Ohio Valley, where French Catholic traders and their native allies skirmish with the advance guard of the Prydein-Haudenosaunee fur trade. You see it in the courts of Europe, where diplomats from the three blocs engage in a dizzying dance of espionage and intrigue. The great irony of this timeline is that Prydein, the kingdom that defined itself by turning its back on Europe, has become a global power by doing just that. By focusing its energies on the Atlantic, by building a society based on fusion and trade rather than conquest and dogma, it has created a stable, prosperous, and powerful civilization. It is not an industrial powerhouse like the Protestant North is becoming, nor is it a monolithic empire like Catholic Spain. It is something else. A maritime republic with a Celtic soul. A kingdom whose greatest strength is its ability to make partners rather than subjects. As you stand on the hill overlooking Rhydichin, you see the three worlds reflected. You see the ancient colleges, a link to Prydein's deep, unique past, a testament to the Insular Church that preserved the light of learning. You see the smoking factories, a sign that the industrial innovations of the Protestant world are being adopted and adapted here. And on the road leading into the city, you see a delegation that could exist nowhere else in this timeline. A group of Haudenosaunee chieftains, tall and proud in their feathered regalia, walking side by side with Brythonic merchants. They have made the long journey across the sea to negotiate a new trade treaty directly with the Singor. They are not emissaries from a conquered people. They are ambassadors from a partner nation, the co-architects of this strange new world. The experiment born from a single moment of Roman hesitation has reached its maturity. The island of mists, left to its own devices, did not sink into barbarism. It endured, it adapted, it fused with its invaders, and it built a civilization on its own terms. The world of 1750 is a more complex, a more balanced, and perhaps a more interesting place because the legions never crossed the water. The unfinished symphony of the Celts was allowed to play on, and it has become the anthem of a new Atlantic world. The narrative archetype for this script is the crucible, where two or more distinct cultures merge to form a new, synthetic whole. Your task is to reflect on the world born from this endless process of fusion. The central question should be, what is gained and what is lost when a culture chooses adaptation and synthesis over purity and resistance? Acknowledge the violence and compromise inherent in this process, but focus on the unique, vibrant, and perhaps more resilient civilization that emerged from the crucible. The tone should be one of thoughtful contemplation, highlighting the strange beauty of a world built from compromise, a culture that is a mosaic of many different, once conflicting pieces. The crucible, a vessel made to withstand intense heat, not to preserve what is placed within it, but to transform it, to melt down disparate, even hostile, elements and fuse them into something new, something stronger. This is the story of Prydein. What was lost in that fire? The pure, undiluted culture of the ancient Brythons, the world of the Druids, was the first to be consumed, its essence forever altered by the Christian spark. The fierce, uncompromising paganism of the Saxons and the Vikings was blunted, its sharp edges worn down and absorbed into the Celtic-Christian mainstream. The proud, Roman certainty of the Normans was softened, Celticized, and ultimately woven into a tapestry it had meant to tear apart. In the New World, the ancient ways of the Haudenosaunee were irrevocably changed by iron, by gunpowder, by a new faith. Purity was the price, paid over and over, but what was gained? A civilization of profound resilience, a culture that learned, by necessity, that survival lies not in brittle purity, but in flexible strength. It met the Roman idea and took its faith, but rejected its empire. It met the Saxon shield wall and learned to contain it. It met the Viking longship and learned to build its own. It met the Norman knight and hired him. It met the Haudenosaunee and made them kin. Each fusion, often born of violence and desperation, added a new layer of strength, a new skill, a new idea. The result is a world that is perhaps less certain, less dogmatic, but more adaptable. A world where the Haudenosaunee ambassador walks the halls of a university founded by Celtic saints. A world built not on the bedrock of a single, conquering idea, but on a mosaic of many, held together by the heat of a shared history. A testament to the power of the crucible,